Chapter 1763. Almost at the same time that sweet laughter rang out, several pitch-black feathers fluttered down from the sky and slowly landed on the ground. Noah, who had sunk into deep thought, was slightly startled. He immediately raised his head and looked in the direction of the window. There, a young girl was sitting on the windowsill. She was wearing a dark robe that seemed to represent inauspiciousness, exuding a profound aura. His long, black, and straight hair that reached his waist hung down softly, slightly moving up and down as the wind blew. The young girl opened her eyes that were as dark as dusk and looked straight at Noah. Her delicate face was like the most perfect piece of art, and she had an equally perfect smile. That scene was simply as beautiful as a painting, and it was enough to make anyone lose their mind. Although Noah did not lose his mind, his attention was completely attracted by the young girl. Looking at the graceful and beautiful young girl sitting on the windowsill, Noah muttered in a low voice. Lestia, this young girl was the contract fairy of the Demon King. The highest dark elf, Lestia. Although she was an elf, Lestia's temperament was extremely elegant and beautiful. There was no difference between her and a human's. And such a young girl, at this very moment, appeared in Noah's room without any ill feelings. She looked straight at Noah with eyes that were as mysterious as dusk, and her beautiful face outlined a mesmerizing smile. You really came here after all. I know you don't want to see me here. Noah glanced at Lestia. After all, you don't want to see me take away the world fragment from Lotus and cause the Dark Elf King's power to go out of control, right? That's right. Lestia nodded without beating around the bush. Although Lotus has always said that the thing in her body doesn't belong to her, but to you, if she loses it, the power of the Dark Elf King in her body will go berserk, making Lotus become like King Solomon, swallowed by the power of the Dark Elf King and turned into a lump of pure resentment. I will absolutely not watch Lotus become like that. So, you're not here to persuade me not to participate in the Elven Sword Dance, are you? Noah pursed his lips. Don't you think it's a little unrealistic to talk about this now? Of course I know. Since you're here, you'll definitely take away the thing in Lotus's body. Lestia's beautiful eyes rippled like the surface of a lake. Of course I know that. It's useless to say anything now. After saying this, Lestia gently jumped down from the window. Her toes touched the ground as if she was dancing. With a light leap, she arrived in front of Noah. Then, under Noah's gaze, Lestia's delicate face still carried a perfect smile as her delicate body slowly bent down. Because Noah was sitting on the edge of the bed, when Lestia bent down, her beautiful face was immediately pulled closer to Noah's face. Her beautiful face was tightly locked with Noah's eyes, causing a burst of fragrance to waft into Noah's nose. At such a close distance, if an outsider saw this, they would definitely think that Noah and Lestia were a pair of lovers. At this moment, if someone were to barge in, they would definitely think that Noah and Lestia were about to kiss. That scene could only be described as ambiguous. However, if one thought about it carefully, in reality, Noah and Lestia's relationship was not good, let alone good. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was bad. The proof was Lestia's next sentence. Have you never thought that I'm here to kill you? Undoubtedly, the content of her words was very creepy. However, Lestia's words were very suggestive, as if she was confessing to her sweetheart. If it was a less resolute man, at this moment, perhaps even the words, if it was you, it wouldn't matter even if you killed me, would have slipped out of his mouth in a delirious manner, right? Unfortunately, Noah was not that type of man. Although Lestia was indeed very beautiful and very elegant, it was not enough to make Noah fall for her. If you can kill me, then you can try it here. Noah smiled indifferently. Of course, if you fail, I don't think I need to tell you the consequences, right? Hee hee. Lestia let out an enchanting laugh. Her eyes, which were rippling like the surface of a lake, gradually regained their calm. How scary. After saying that, Lestia wanted to straighten up. However, at this moment, Noah suddenly reached out his hand and hugged Lestia's slender waist, pulling her into his embrace. Lestia did not expect Noah to suddenly do this. She did not even have time to react before she was pulled into Noah's embrace. Her delicate body was tightly pressed against Noah's body. This position was even more ambiguous than before. At first glance, it was obvious that they were lovers intending to be intimate. Lestia was caught off guard and could not help but be stunned. Then, a hint of anger appeared in her eyes. No matter how much she looked like a human girl, Lestia was still an elf. Noah's current actions were already considered disrespectful to elves. Not to mention that Lestia wasn't an ownerless sprite, but a contracted sprite with a master. As a contracted elf, regardless of the level of the contracted elf, she would not casually get close to another elf. For example, apart from Noah, Aster and Athena did not express any intimacy with anyone else. As the highest-ranking dark elf, Lestia could not help but have this tendency. However, before Lestia could make things difficult for him, Noah held Lestia's waist with one hand and pinched her chin with the other. He raised Lestia's face to look at him. Then, Noah stared into Lestia's eyes and said, "You're right. You just said that there is a person as terrifying as Lotus in the Purgatory Apostles. What is that about?" This sentence calmed the anger in Lestia's heart. At this moment, Lestia no longer cared about Noah's ambiguous actions. She looked at Noah with a mischievous smile. "Do you care that much? I would be lying if I said I don't care." Noah stared intently at Lestia's dust-colored eyes as if he was trying to see through Lestia's heart. Logically speaking, there should be no one in this world that can reach the level of Lotus and I. Besides the Elf King, there should be no one else. "That's where you're wrong," Lestia corrected him, pretending to be kind. "That contracted Miss Holy Sword. In terms of strength, even the Elf King has to be wary of her. Isn't that an example?" Noah immediately fell silent. In the elemental elf world, there might not be any elves as powerful as Miss Holy Sword. However, there are still existences that are second only to the Elf King. Lestia said. They are existences that are above the demon god elves and are known as mythical elves. Mythical elves? Noah's heart skipped a beat. Mythical elves. Noah had seen this term in the ancient books in the Academy Library. Just as Lestia said, they were existences that were above the demon god elves and second only to the Elf King. According to the records, elves of this level only lived in the elemental elf world and never entered the human world. At least, in the records from ancient times, there was only one mythical elven that appeared in the human world. It was a dragon elven. Moreover, it was the most powerful dragon elven. That dragon elven lived in the Dragon Duchy of Duragonia. As an elf, it ruled the entire Dragon Duchy of Duragonia and was worshipped as a king by the people of that country. People called it the Dragon King. Thinking of this, Noah said sarcastically, "You are not going to tell me that in the Purgatory Apostles, someone has contracted a mythical elven, right? Do you want to know?" Lestia smiled sweetly. "You will find out sooner or later." As soon as she finished speaking, Lestia, who was sitting in Noah's arms, suddenly turned into a black feather and floated to the ground. She disappeared. Noah remained silent as a thoughtful expression appeared in his eyes. Chapter 1764. At this very moment, a young girl was standing at the top of a city tower on a hill, facing the wind. The young girl was wearing an exotic costume that looked like a witch's costume. Her beautiful black hair that reached her waist swayed in the wind. Together with her loose-fitting clothes, they fluttered in the wind and fluttered in the wind. The young girl stood against the wind and looked into the distance as if she could see something. She stood there quietly like a statue. Under such circumstances, it didn't take long for another girl to appear there. It was a young girl wearing a green military uniform. Like the previous girl, she had long black hair that reached her waist. However, unlike the previous girl's aloof temperament, the young girl in the military uniform carried a sharp aura that was as cold as a blade. She wore a mask with a picture of a ghost on it. It looked quite frightening. The moment the young girl in the military uniform arrived, she immediately said with a cold voice, "It's not easy to find you, the strongest sword dancer." Hearing this, Lotus did not even turn her head. She continued to look into the distance as if she already knew who was coming. She said this in an ethereal tone. Why are you looking for me? Lu. It's best not to say that name here. The young girl in the military uniform suddenly interrupted Lotus without any hesitation. The aura on her body also became somewhat scorching. That name is taboo here. If you don't want to get into trouble, it's best not to say it. Is that so? Lotus said without any change in expression. Then what should I call you? Call me Red Lotus. The young girl in the military uniform who called herself Red Lotus said coldly. At least, you can call me that here. Understood. Lotus said almost without any hesitation. Then, Red Lotus, why are you looking for me? Your dark elf seems to have gone to find that man. Red Lotus did not beat around the bush and said directly. Don't you plan to control her? There's no need for that. Lotus answered very straightforwardly. Lestia is free to go wherever she wants. I have no right to control her, and I won't. Is that so? Red Lotus said indifferently. But, I remember that the dark elf seems to want to kill that man for you. If you let her go to that man, aren't you afraid that she will secretly help you solve everything? It's fine. Lotus said. If it's only Lestia, she won't be able to kill Noah. You sure have a lot of confidence in that Noah doll. I hope he's really as useful as you say. Don't let me down. Red Lotus turned her head away in a non-committal manner, then changed the topic of the conversation. Besides, even if that dark elf didn't find Noah doll, your sister would have gone to find him, right? Hearing this, Lien's brows finally furrowed. Maoya also went to find him? Not only did he look for him, he even attacked him, Hong Lien replied mechanically. According to Lily's report, Moya Alianstalu took out the military elves sealed in the magical equipment and used them to attack the flying ship of the Alicia Elven Academy. If Noah was here and heard Red Lotus's description, he would definitely be shocked, right? Because, according to Red Lotus, the military sprite that attacked the flying ship during the day was controlled by Lotus' sister. Although that Ray sprite hadn't reached the level of a tactical military sprite, it wasn't something that a single sprite user could command, right? With the power of that Ray fish sprite, there should be at least a few sprite users controlling it for it to be able to be successfully commanded. Based on Red Lotus' words, Lotus' younger sister seemed to be able to command such a military sprite by herself. If that was the case, then the girl named Maoya either had outstanding abilities as an elf user, comparable to Leola and Versilia, or was trained as an elf user who specialized in commanding military elves. And now, such an existence had her eyes on Noah. If Noah knew about this, he would definitely laugh bitterly at how popular he was. Of course, what was even more shocking was that Lotus actually had a younger sister. That Lotus Asubal actually had a younger sister? That was simply unheard of. Only Lien knew how much of a headache her younger sister could cause. Undoubtedly, she promised me that she wouldn't attack Noah, Lotus said helplessly. In the end, Maoya really went back on her word? For Moya Alianstalu, even if the world was destroyed, it wouldn't have anything to do with her. Only you, her elder sister, are something that she remembers more than anyone else. Hong Lien's voice was emotionless as she described it simply. And you care so much about Noah Duro. There's no way that monster wouldn't be jealous. That's enough reason for her to take action. Lotus fell silent. This was because Hong Lien's words were irrefutable. Although it sounded unbelievable, Moya Alianstalu was such a person. She admired Lotus morbidly. She longed for Lotus morbidly. She adored Lotus morbidly. This was Moya Alianstalu, a young girl who gave Lotus a headache. Forget it. Lotus sighed. In any case, even Moya probably can't do anything to Noah, right? Unfortunately, the one who dealt with the military elf controlled by Moya Alianstalu wasn't Noah Doria, but the princess of Chi Dragon. Hong Lien cast her gaze on Lotus. I haven't seen his strength yet, so I'll maintain a wait-and-see attitude for now. If he's really as mysterious and powerful as you say, then that's great. My plan should be of use to him, Hong Lien said coldly. If that's just your one-sided opinion, although it's a pity to lose a useful chess piece, since you're on my side, I have nothing to lose. With that, Hong Lian turned her back to Lotus. Just as she was about to leave, she seemed to have thought of something and said this. There will be a ceremony tonight in the form of a ball. Do you want to participate? A ball? Lotus pondered for a moment, then shook her head. No need. If you want to participate, you can go with Lily. Oh. Hong Lian was surprised. I thought you would go and meet him. I've already told him everything that I should have told him, Lotus said in a tone that was filled with a strong will. Next, I just need to communicate with my sword. That's enough. Up to you. Hong Lian was silent for a moment, then said. If that's the case, I won't participate. Let me see how valuable Noah Doria is at the Elven Sword Dance Festival. After saying this, Hong Lian didn't stay any longer and left. Only Lotus continued to stand against the wind. She held her heart with one hand as she softly muttered. Has this moment finally arrived? The sky began to darken as Lillian Ashubal muttered. Night fell here. Under the gradually darkening night sky, the city tower located on the hill was still brightly lit. It was quite bright. Of course, it wasn't the light from the lamps, but the light released by the light fairies. Therefore, even in the courtyard, there were still light particles floating in the air like fireflies, illuminating the entire space. Under such circumstances, in the darkness, a petite girl in a black robe slowly appeared and stepped into the courtyard. The moment the petite figure appeared, the small light fairies in the surroundings seemed to have seen something terrifying. They all flew away in fright, causing the entire courtyard to become incomparably dark in an instant. In the next second, the girl lifted the hood of her black robe, exposing her face to the air. It was a girl who looked to be about 12 or 13 years old. She had a head of long, dark gray hair tied into two ponytails that drooped on both sides of her head. The girl raised her head and looked into the building in front of her. A ferocious light flashed in her eyes. I won't let anyone take my sister away. I won't. A mark flashed on the back of one of the girl's hands. Chapter 1765. At the same time, when the sky started to darken, Noah, who estimated that Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice should have finished packing their luggage, walked out of his room and headed towards the girls' room. The opening ceremony of the Elven Sword Dance Festival would be held tonight. Therefore, not only the elven messengers who came to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival, but even the royal family of the various countries would come to the dance venue to observe. However, they didn't have to attend this dance. Apart from the royal family of the various countries, the elven messengers who were preparing to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival were free to choose whether to attend or not. There were no restrictions. Noah didn't want to attend. As the only male elven messenger, if Noah appeared at the dance venue, who knew what kind of strange gazes he would attract from the royal family of the nobles? To those pure elven messengers, Noah only needed to have the factor of being a male to be looked at in a different light. Moreover, which G of the gods' parliament valued purity even more than the elven messengers. Basically, she was in an environment where the opposite sex was completely isolated. Wouldn't she look at Noah in a different light? After so many lessons, this time, Noah didn't want to be looked at like a monkey in a public place and be pointed at by others. Therefore, Noah wouldn't attend the dance. As for whether the girls in the team would attend, Noah didn't know. Therefore, Noah felt that he had to ask for the opinions of the team members first. Ugh, just as Noah passed by the courtyard, a slight strange sound entered Noah's ears. Immediately, Noah stopped in his tracks. Because that sound, no matter how he heard it, sounded like a painful groan that had been deliberately suppressed. At that moment, Noah turned his head and looked in the direction of the voice. He slowly approached the source of the voice. Not long after, Noah saw it. In a dark corner of the courtyard, a girl was supporting herself against the wall with one hand and covering her heart with the other, letting out that suppressed groan. Noah could clearly see that the girl was wearing a beret on her head. The beret was embroidered with the emblem of a flying dragon. A dragon emblem? Noah said in surprise. Raviola Lancaster? Hearing someone calling her, Leola's slender shoulders trembled slightly, then she slowly turned her head. At this moment, Noah's eyes suddenly narrowed. The eyes of Leola, who had turned around, were incomparably scarlet red. It was as if they were filled with blood. Rather than calling those eyes the eyes of a human, it would be better to call them the eyes of a beast. At the very least, Noah did not see the rationality unique to humans. Instead, there was a great deal of arrogance. Being stared at by such a pair of eyes in the dark, anyone would feel their scalp tingling. Although Noah did not become like this, he still frowned. What's wrong with you? It's you? Leola clutched her chest and also frowned. Why are you here? You're the one who asked me first. Noah pursed his lips. I just happened to pass by. Is that so? Leola stared at Noah with her scarlet eyes and spoke in a cold voice. If that's the case, you better stay away from me. Otherwise, I might attack you later. Looking at you now, you do look like you will attack anyone at any time. Noah shrugged, but he didn't leave as Leola said. Instead, he continued to ask. What's going on? What? Leola said sarcastically. This time, it's your turn to test me and get information from me? You can think of it that way, Noah said indifferently. Of course, you can also choose not to tell me. Forget it. It's not something that needs to be hidden. Anyway, a lot of people know about this matter. Leola tightened his grip on his chest and said. If you're expecting something to happen to my body, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. The dragon blood in my body is slightly active. Dragon blood? Noah was startled at first, but he soon recalled. The so-called dragon blood referred to a special physique that appeared in the witches of the Dragon Duchy of Doragonia. It was said that there was a type of witches in the Dragon Duchy who specialized in serving the wyverns. The dragon blood was a very rare unique physique that would only appear in witch concubines like her. It was said that when the dragon blood in the witches with this special physique awakened, they would completely assimilate with the wyverns. In other words, when the dragon blood awakened, the witches with this special physique would be physically and mentally close to the wyverns. In the end, they would possess physical strength and instincts comparable to the wyverns, greatly increasing their combat strength. The side effect was that the witches with the dragon blood would be like a berserk wyvern without much rationality. Therefore, it was a double-edged sword. I didn't expect you to possess the dragon blood as well. Noah looked at Leola's scarlet eyes. It seems like you're much stronger than I thought. There's nothing to be surprised about. The awakening of the dragon blood isn't just about benefits. I know that. Leola stared at Noah closely. Because there are too many capable elf users here, the warlike part of me stimulated the dragon blood to become active. If you don't want to fight me here, you'd better leave quickly. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't attack you later. After all, in Leola's heart, Noah was a stronger opponent than Versilia. If Noah continued to stay here, Leola, who longed to fight Noah, might completely awaken the dragon blood in her body. That might be the case. When that happened, Noah would have to bear the brunt of the battle with Leola. I don't want to do that kind of troublesome thing. Noah surrendered right away. It's better for me not to be a busybody here. Bye. After that, Noah turned around and tried to leave. However, at that moment, Leola suddenly extended her hand and grabbed Noah's arm. Now that you mention it, I feel like fighting you instead. Leola stared at Noah and her eyes glowed with a scarlet radiance. Just treat it as an afterthought before the battle. Keep me company for a while. Leola's adorable face curled into a battle-thirsty smile as she said this. On the other hand, Leola extended her other hand to her waist and placed it on the pitch-black greatsword. Some phosphorescent divine might surged from Leola's body. It was apparent that Leola wasn't joking. Looking at the scarlet radiance in Leola's eyes getting denser, Noah knitted his brows tightly. At the next second, a tender voice sounded from the side. Big sister over there, I advise you not to attack that big brother over there. He's Maoya's prey. As soon as the voice sounded. Swish. A long whip made of clear water fell from the sky and swept across the space. Amidst a chilling sound, it smashed toward Noah and Leola's direction. Noah and Leola froze for a moment. Then, they stomped their feet on the ground and retreated rapidly. Smack. Amidst a crisp sound, the long whip made of water struck the ground heavily and smashed a few stone bricks in the courtyard. The shards shot out in all directions. Even the stone bricks were smashed easily. If the long whip of water were to land on a human, perhaps it wouldn't just leave a few scars. After dodging the attack, Noah and Leola lifted their heads and looked in the direction where the long whip of water came from. Over there was a water ball that was a size larger than a human floating in midair. The outline of the water ball had countless water streams dancing around it. It looked like a long whip, but more like a tentacle. Beside the water ball stood a petite young lady in a black robe. Leola stared at the young lady coldly with scarlet eyes. "Who are you?" However, this sentence made the young lady cast a pressuring gaze at Leola. "The person I'm looking for isn't you. You're a hindrance. Big sister, hurry up and disappear." In an instant, the tentacle-like water stream swept across like a long whip and lashed toward Leola's direction. Chapter 1766. The water whip cut through the air with an extremely sharp sound. With a powerful force, it fiercely smashed in Leola's direction. Judging from the swift and fierce wind, it was apparent that this attack wasn't merciful at all. Noah narrowed his eyes slowly. Even though he didn't know who the young lady who called herself Maoya was, he knew that her target seemed to be him. The evidence was that the young lady named Maoya had been staring at Noah from the very beginning and didn't take in Leola at all. Maoya was clearly treating Leola like she was nothing, but she actually launched a merciless attack on Leola without saying a single word. No one dared to believe that this young lady, who appeared to be only 12 or 13 years old, was actually this cruel. But it was a pity that Maoya was too arrogant and belittled Leola. Slash. Accompanied by the sound of slashing, the pitch-black sword flashed like a flash of light, directly cutting through the oncoming whip of water. "I see." Leola's eyes were as red as flames and she pointed the pitch-black sword at Maoya from afar. "Do you want to replace that male elf and fight with me?" It seemed like Maoya's attack had awakened the dragon blood that Leola had been suppressing. On the other hand, Maoya finally shifted her gaze to Leola and exclaimed in surprise. "You actually used your sword to sever the tentacle of Skylar, which doesn't have a physical body. Big sister, you're pretty capable." "Skylar?" Noah was struck by a thought and looked at the water ball hovering beside Maoya in astonishment. "Is that Skylar?" Skylar. It was a type of military elf used for special missions. Due to the fact that military sprites were usually extremely destructive, almost every single one of them required at least several sprite users to control them. Tactical and strategic military sprites required even more manpower to be used. However, Skylar was a more special type of military elf. Its destructive power wasn't considered great. Therefore, the elf users could control it by themselves. However, it was rather difficult to deal with. If he performed well, Skylar would be able to fight against the high elves. He would be able to compete with the 12 knights of the kingdom of Odisha. Because its combat power was not bad, and the conditions for summoning it were quite simple, this kind of military sprite was generally easy to abuse. Therefore, after the last war, Skylar was considered too dangerous and was sealed and abandoned by the various countries. Now, this kind of sealed and abandoned military sprite had appeared here, which was why Noah was a little surprised. Even Leola was slightly startled. Then, she stared at Skylar who was floating beside Maoya with a burning gaze. "I didn't expect that the abandoned military elves that were judged to be too dangerous would appear here. Let's hope that your Skylar can calm my surging blood." "What's wrong?" "Big sister? Do you want to fight Maoya? Maoya won't be merciful, you know." Maoya said those cruel words with an innocent expression and tone. "Maoya's target isn't you. If you intend to obstruct Maoya, Maoya will use Skylar's tentacles to tear your body into pieces. You want to kill me by using an abandoned military elf? Leola's eyes flashed with a scarlet luster. Then let's see who's stronger between my Nidhogg and Skylar. After saying that, Leola threw the pitch-black greatsword in her hand into the air and chanted an incantation in the elven language with a stern voice. Dark evil dragon soul, shatter the endless light. The pitch-black greatsword that was thrown into the air suddenly released a blinding light. In that blinding light, the pitch-black greatsword gradually melted and turned into a pitch-black dragon. Roar! It was the most powerful dragon elf in the Dragon Emperor Knight Legion, of the Dragon Dukedom of Dragon Dukedom, Nidhogg. The pitch-black dragon let out a roar that shook the air. It opened its ferocious dragon mouth and gathered pitch-black godly power. At this moment, even the surrounding air seemed to have been stirred up, suddenly becoming turbid. Maoya widened her eyes slightly and said in a low voice. Not good. I underestimated that big sister's strength. However, before Maoya had time to react, pitch-black scorching flames poured down from the sky like a flash of light. Boom! The pitch-black flames that descended from the sky landed on Skylar's body and exploded, setting off strong gusts of wind that crushed the stone bricks on the ground into rubble and shot out in all directions like bullets. The explosion peeled off the sand and exposed the surface of the ground. The surrounding flowers, plants, and trees collapsed one after another as if they were hit by a typhoon. That destructive power was simply ridiculously strong. It was enough to compare to a tactical military sprite. Therefore, in the gusts of wind, the girl named Maoya let out a sorrowful cry. She was blown away and rolled on the ground in a sorry state. Noah, on the other hand, had retreated the moment Nidhogg was summoned. He steadily avoided the oncoming storm, appearing to be so calm and collected. On the other hand, Leola looked at Skylar that was turned into ashes by Nidhogg's breath. She frowned deeply and sighed in disappointment. After all, it's only a military elf used for special missions. Even if it's judged to be dangerous, it still can't compare to a tactical military elf. In order to fight with Leola's Nidhogg, it had to be at least a tactical military elf. That was what Leola was implying. Maoya got up from the ground in a sorry state. She looked at Skylar that had disappeared and then at the disappointed Leola. Her eyes lost all luster like that of a doll. I'll kill you, in an instant, a terrifying feeling that made one's heart shrink spread from Maoya's petite body. Clank. On the back of one of Maoya's hands, an imprint bloomed with radiance. Oh. Leola's interest was reignited. Are you ready to summon a contract elf? Unlike Leola, who was gradually controlled by her battle instincts due to the awakening of her dragon blood, Noah looked at the imprint on the back of Maoya's hand and narrowed his eyes. No. That's not an elf imprint. That's a spell imprint. Spell imprint. It was an elf imprint that could be artificially transplanted into an elf user's body. It could add different attributes and various effects to the elf and even forcefully draw out the elf's power. However, it would reduce the user's life force and cause a mental breakdown. In the past, Versilia had transplanted it. Gray and Vaz had also imprinted a spell imprint on their hearts, but they both lost their elf user abilities due to the backlash. That girl actually had such a dangerous item? Not only that, but Maoya also raised one hand. That hand was wearing a ring. From that ring, Noah felt a rather powerful divine power. Therefore, Noah could be sure. That was a magic equipment. Moreover, it was a magic equipment that sealed an elf. Another military elf? After all, it seemed that Maoya wanted to use the elf sealed in the magic equipment to fight. However, an elf without a contract couldn't be used in battle at all. Unless it was a military elf. That little girl, where did she get so many military elves from? Just as Noah's expression became a little serious, Maoya's eyes suddenly trembled, and her expression became uncertain. Then, Maoya glared at Leola. I'll let you go today. Next time, Maoya will definitely kill you. After saying that, Maoya looked at Noah. Big brother, you're the same. Maoya won't let anyone who pesters my sister go. After leaving this sentence, Mauya moved like a rabbit and suddenly got into the grass at the side. Seeing this, Noah almost subconsciously wanted to chase after her, but then his footsteps slowed down and he suddenly retreated. Almost at the same time, a scorching breath fell from the sky. Boom! Amidst the explosion, the scorching breath hit the ground, setting off a violent storm and flames. In the storm and flames, Leola slowly walked out. Her incomparably red eyes stared straight at Noah. Noah's face sank. Chapter 1767. Roar. In mid-air, the pitch-black dragon let out a roar that shook the air. Immediately after, its entire body was covered by a burst of light. Its body gradually turned into light particles and converged in Leola's direction below. Leola raised her hand high up and let the light particles that fell from the sky flow into her hand little by little like a stream of water. In the next second, the light particles that converged in Leola's hand condensed into a pitch-black greatsword that Leola held tightly. This is my elven device, Dragon Slayer. Leola directly cast her gaze on Noah, her scarlet eyes flashing. Male elven user, take out your elven device. It seems that the dragon blood in your body has awakened. Noah frowned deeply. If you want to fight, can't you just chase after that elven user just now? I'm not interested in a guy who only knows how to run away. Moreover, that elven user's military elven user was simply too weak. Although I don't know if she's still hiding any trump cards, compared to her, I'm more interested in you. Leola's voice faintly revealed a hint of fanaticism. Didn't they say that you can compete with that strongest sword dancer? Let me see what you're capable of. After saying that, Leola suddenly leaped like an arrow that had been released from a bow. With a faint sound of breaking through the air, she violently rushed in front of Noah. Come. Come and satisfy the dragon in my body. As the scorching words were spoken, Leola raised the pitch-black greatsword in her hand high up. Without any fancy moves, she viciously slashed down at Noah in front of her. This slash stirred up a powerful force that caused the air to become chaotic, causing a sharp sword hum to resound in the air. Without any hesitation, Noah sidestepped. With a turn of his feet, he immediately dodged to the side like a ghost. Swoosh! The slash that carried a powerful force swept past Noah's original position and brushed past Noah's body before landing heavily in the air. However, the force that it carried was like a sharp knife that scraped Noah's skin. The strong wind that caused Noah to feel a slight tingling sensation on his skin made him understand one thing in an instant. This guy actually completely materialized the elven device? In the elemental world of the elemental spirits, elven users could use contracted elves as pure divine power. In this way, the body possessed by divine power was almost equivalent to the elves themselves. Even if they were directly hit by the elven device and elven magic, they wouldn't suffer any real damage and would only cause mental damage. Back then, the elven user would choose to enter the elemental world of the elemental world of the world of the elemental world because of this reason. Needless to say, a sacrificial ceremony like the Elven Sword Dance Festival definitely prohibited intentional harm. Therefore, the elemental world of the elemental world of the elemental world of the world of the elemental world of the world of the elemental spirits. In this way, elven users only needed to reduce the degree of materialization of the elven device and they could directly damage the elemental world of the world of the elemental world of the world of the elemental world of the world of the elemental world. However, Leola directly materialized the elven device. If Noah didn't dodge that attack just now, wouldn't he have been split into two? Leola was simply trying to kill Noah. If she did so, no matter how good her reason was, once the gods' parliament knew about it, her qualifications to participate in the Elemental Sword Dance Festival would definitely be revoked. Unfortunately, Leola's eyes were already glowing red. It was obvious that this Dragon Duke had completely lost her mind. Under such circumstances, it was useless to say anything to Leola. They say that women are unreasonable. This principle is really vividly demonstrated by you elven users. Because as a male, Noah was viewed differently in this world of elven users where there were only females. Noah could still understand this point. Who asked those elven users to be pure and innocent young girls who had never come into contact with the opposite sex before? However, understanding was one thing, it didn't mean that Noah could be casually picked on. Noah tolerated the elven user who claimed to be Maya, who came out of nowhere and declared that she wanted to kill him. After all, Noah could be considered to have caused a lot of influence in this world. It wasn't strange that someone wanted to kill him. Not to mention this world, no matter which world it was, there would always be people who schemed to kill Noah. There was no need to find it strange at all. However, that didn't mean that Noah didn't have a temper. Those who killed would be killed by others. Since others wanted to kill Noah, then even if they were killed by Noah, they couldn't blame anyone. As for Leola, a Duke Long who had lost her rationality, Noah didn't want to be entangled with her at all. Therefore, almost at the instant when Leola's sword fell, Noah suddenly raised his hand and slapped heavily on Leola's sword. Smack! Along with a crisp sound, the elven device in Leola's hand was sent flying by Noah's slap. WH. Leola couldn't help but change her expression. At this moment, a voice sounded in Leola's ears. Although your strength has increased greatly after the enhancement of the dragon blood, you've lost half of your rationality. Your attacks are too easily seen through. An attack of this level won't be able to hurt me. After saying those words, Noah's body arrived behind Leola. Then, he ruthlessly chopped down on Leola's neck with his hand. Bam! Amidst the muffled sound, Leola's scarlet eyes widened. Then, her pupils began to slacken. Ugh! Leola staggered a few steps forward and turned her head with difficulty to look at Noah. Noah Dole, after squeezing out those words, Leola fell limply to the ground. Noah extended his hand and caught Leola in his arms. For an instant, Noah could almost clearly feel the softness of Leola's delicate body and the elasticity of her plump upper body. This dragoness is surprisingly well endowed. After leaving such a thought, Noah placed the fainted Leola on the ground. Then, he stood up and looked in the direction where Maya disappeared. A commotion broke out in the surroundings. Clearly, the short exchange between Leola and Maya earlier had already attracted the attention of the other people. Noah ignored the commotion around him and continued to stare in the direction where Maya disappeared as he muttered to himself. For sister. At the same time, outside the city tower on the hill, a girl with dark gray pigtails walked out of the shadows and spoke in a very displeased tone. Come out. Just as Maya's voice fell, a girl suddenly and silently appeared from another shadow. It was a girl who looked older than Maya and was about 15 or 16 years old. The girl had a coffee-colored complexion. Her hair was emerald green, her eyes were crimson red, and she had a pair of long, pointy ears. She was from the same subhuman race as the merchant of the Skeleton Alliance, Vivian, who once gave Versilia the incantation the Elfie tribe. Maya spoke in an extremely displeased tone to the girl from the Elfie tribe. Lily, why did you stop me? It would be strange if I didn't stop you, right? The girl from the Elfie tribe named Lily frowned. You actually tried to kill a contestant of the Elven Sword Dance Festival in such a place. Do you want to be disqualified? Maya doesn't care about that kind of thing. Maya puffed up her cheeks. As long as I can kill that big brother who is pestering sister, Maya will be satisfied. But if you do that, Lady Lily and Asubble will not be happy. Lily tried to persuade him. Not to mention, you also plan to release the military elf sealed in the ring. That's too wasteful. Anyway, I have to use it sooner or later, right? Maya didn't look regretful at all and glanced at Lily. Lily, every time Maya wants to make a move, you always use sister to pressure me. Do you really think Maya won't kill you? Lily's body froze on the spot. Humph, Maya coldly snorted and turned away. If there's a next time, Maya will definitely kill you. Lily heaved a sigh of relief. Chapter 1768. Idiot. In a rather spacious room, Claire was throwing a tantrum at Noah. Do you want to be disqualified? Engaging in a personal fight right before the start of the Elven Sword Dance Festival. This matter wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. If the members of the House of Gods thought that Noah's personal fight with Leola was hindering his opponent's performance in the Elven Sword Dance Festival, it was entirely possible that it would be considered a violation of the rules. Noah could only express his innocence. I was just passing by. I didn't participate in any personal fight at all. It was that Maoya and Leola who suddenly started pestering me. What could I do? After Leola was knocked out, the people who rushed to the scene due to the huge commotion all thought that Noah and Leola were having a personal fight. It even caused a commotion. Later on, it was Leola who woke up and explained the matter clearly that the commotion stopped. However, Leola seemed to have completely targeted Noah. Before she left, she looked at Noah with a burning desire to battle even though there was no longer any arrogance and bloodthirst in her eyes. You are indeed not a simple person to be able to knock out my elven equipment so easily when I'm in the dragon blood awakening state. I look forward to having a proper battle with you during the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Leola only left after leaving these words that sounded very much like what a battle maniac would say. This made Noah feel like he was being cheated. He was really just passing by. Why did he cause so much trouble? But who is that Maoya? Alice expressed her doubts. She actually attacked a contestant right before the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Even if she wasn't a contestant, she would still be banned by the House of Gods, right? How would I know where that girl came from? Noah sighed. According to what she said, it seems like she wanted to kill me because she didn't want me to pester her sister. Pester her sister? Linley was stunned. Then, she looked at Noah in disbelief. Could it be? Could it be that you attacked a cute girl the moment you arrived? Her words made the other innocent young ladies widen their eyes and cast cold gazes at Noah. So that's how it is. Then it makes sense. Claire glared at Noah. It's because you shamelessly attacked his sister that he wanted to kill you at all costs, right? I didn't expect that the man that Leanna Subble values is actually this kind of person. Fayanna said regretfully. Undoubtedly, you have so many cute girls around you, yet you're still going to attack girls from other countries. Could it be that you, a male elf, have finally awakened your Demon King side? I really misjudged you. Alice teared up as if she had been betrayed. She pulled out the knight's sword at her waist and pointed it at Noah's throat. I'm going to make you into chicken risotto. Noah fell silent. A second later, Noah narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Can't you have a more interesting reaction? How many times has it been? Seeing that Noah was powerless to explain himself, Claire, Linley, and Alice acted as if they had found evidence. They became agitated and made a ruckus, which annoyed Noah to no end. At this moment, Noah really had the urge to tie all of these girls up. Looking at this scene, Fayanna blinked her eyes as though her prank had succeeded. So popular, if this situation was called popular, then Noah sincerely hoped that he was someone who wasn't loved by his uncle or grandma. At this moment, a knock on the door sounded, which made the group of girls stop fooling around. Then, before anyone could say anything, the door was directly opened by someone. Immediately after, a small figure suddenly rushed in from outside the door, rushing in the direction of Lin Si Lei. Sister. Following this delicate and crisp voice, a small figure rushed in from outside the door and directly jumped into Lin Si Lei's arms. Wah! Linley was startled. Everyone also looked over. In Lin Si Lei's arms, a little girl was hugging her tightly. It was a little girl who looked about 10 years old. The little girl had a head of light blonde hair that was as gorgeous and noble as Lin Si Lei's. She was wearing a small white dress, and her clear eyes revealed the innocence of a child. Her appearance was also very cute. Taking a closer look, this little girl was somewhat similar to Linley. Seeing this little girl, Linley cried out in surprise. Miryu? Why are you here? Hearing this, the little girl called Miryu raised her head and said to Linley with a happy face. Carol brought me here. As soon as she said this, Carol, who was wearing a maid uniform, ran in while panting. Miss. Miss Miriu. It's very rude to enter someone's room without permission. It's okay. The little girl called Miriu said indifferently. Anyway, this is the room of sister and sister's friends. Only then did the crowd realize what was going on. Hey, Linley, Fianna said curiously. Is this your sister? That's right. Linley nodded. This is my family's youngest sister. As soon as Linley's voice fell, Malaya broke free from her sister's embrace, lifted her skirt, and courteously performed a standard aristocratic salute to everyone present. I am the third daughter of the Lawrence Frost family. My name is Miriu, please take care of me. Seeing Miriu's courteous appearance, Fianna and Alice had a good impression of her. So polite, as expected of the daughter of a famous noble family. Alice, that's right. Compared to this child, Claire is more like a child. Fianna, Lou. So long-winded. Claire seemed to have some self-awareness and couldn't help but say angrily. I can also be very polite. Noah accidentally made an unexpected sound. What is the meaning of this? Claire immediately flew into a rage. However, this only made Claire seem even more childish. Only Lindsay Lay said with a proud look on her face. Although Miriu is only 9 years old, she has already learned all the etiquette lessons. She is different from Claire. What do you mean by different from me? Claire shouted angrily at Linley. I've also finished all my etiquette lessons. As soon as she said this, everyone fell silent and looked at Claire with pity. Under that gaze, Claire's delicate body began to tremble. Then, she threw herself towards the bed with tears in her eyes. Anyway, I can only compare to a 9-year-old child. And I can't even compare to a fallen noble. Seeing this, everyone didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At this time, Miriu looked straight at Noah and suddenly said, Are you Noah's big brother? Noah didn't expect Miriu to suddenly mention him and said with uncertainty. You know me? So, you are really brother Noah? Miriu suddenly burst into a smile. Of course I know you. You are my sister's private gigolo. Carol told me everything. This sentence almost made Noah fall to the ground. Private gigolo? Alice's eyes widened. I didn't expect that there would be such a development. Even Fianna was shocked. So that's your relationship? Even Claire stuck her head out of the blankets and called out. Me lay you. Lindsay Lay cried out in panic. You. What are you talking about? Did I say something wrong? Miriu tilted her head and said innocently. But, Carol undoubtedly told me that brother Noah not only lives in the same room as my sister, but also stole my sister's first kiss? Carol. Linley's face immediately turned red, and she began to hit Carol's back, making her laugh. As for the other young ladies, they cast cold gazes at Noah again. Noah looked up at the ceiling, speechless. Who asked him to take advantage of her? Chapter 1769. In the elemental elf world, although the 5 sacred domains belonged to different elf kings, the members of the gods' parliament didn't only serve the sacred domain's lord. Instead, all 5 elf kings served them. In almost every holy region, there was a main sacrificial hall for each of the 5 elven kings, as well as a common grand sacrificial hall. Needless to say, the function of the sacrificial hall was the same as the ancestral hall and the shrine. It was a place for worship. As for the sword dance festival of the elves, although there was another venue, the audience would gather in the great sacrificial hall to watch the entire competition through the live broadcast. Therefore, early in the morning, the hall of the great sacrificial hall was filled with spectators from all over the continent. Of course, those who could come to the elemental spirit realm and directly watch the competition couldn't be ordinary civilians. Instead, they were the nobles who had the ability to come here. Apart from the royal family and the nobles, the witch concubines of the fairy trainer cultivation organizations of the various countries could also come here to watch the competition. At the very least, Noah, who was mixed in the crowd, could occasionally see students wearing Alicia Elven Academy uniforms. Oh! Amidst the enthusiastic cheers of the audience, the elves who were about to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival entered the venue in an orderly fashion and ascended the altar at the center of the great sacrificial hall. The surrounding cheers rose and fell one after another. Even if one didn't use their hearts to feel the enthusiasm of the audience, they could clearly feel it. Noah, who had climbed up the altar, saw a circular array. Teleportation array? It seemed that the teleportation array was the channel used to send the contestants to the competition venue. Looking at the teleportation array, Noah began to mutter in his heart. I hope it works on me. With Noah's special physique that could repel mysteries below the level of gods, if the mysteries were to be used directly on him, they would be ineffective against him. Therefore, Noah could only hope that the teleportation array would not be directly used on a person. Instead, it would be like the gate of the elemental fairies. It would only be effective if it opened a door for him to pass through. If it's the type that directly affects humans, then I hope that the power used by this teleportation array is the power of the Elf King. After all, in this world, the only mystery that could work on Noah was probably the mystery that originated from the Elven King. After muttering to himself, Noah raised his head and looked around. There were a total of 24 teams participating in this year's Fairy Sword Dance Festival. At this moment, the 24 teams representing the various countries had all gathered on the altar. The elven envoys in each of these 24 teams were the elites of their respective countries. Thus, Claire, Lindsley, Fayanna, and Alice were silent, a rare sight. Clearly, they were somewhat nervous. The elven envoys of the other teams seemed to be more or less the same. Some of their faces were filled with nervousness, and even their bodies were completely stiff. Under such circumstances, the atmosphere of a group of people seemed somewhat out of place with the surroundings. They were the elven envoys of the Dragon Emperor Knights that belonged to the Dragon Duchy of Draco, led by Leola. Unlike the other elven envoys, the elven envoys belonging to the Dragon Emperor Knights were like an army. Everyone stood in a row calmly, giving off a sense of oppression. The leader, Leola, also stood there with a calm expression. However, her eyes met with Noah's eyes, and a burning desire to fight surged in them. This situation made Noah sigh inwardly. So I've been targeted? Come to think of it, he had to be more or less on guard against the Dragon Emperor Knights during the Fairy Sword Dance Festival, in case these people suddenly jumped out to cause trouble. At this moment, Claire nudged Noah with her elbow and said nervously, "Don't worry. Look over there." Hearing this, Noah followed Claire's gaze and looked in one direction. There was a team all dressed in black robes there. Looking at that team, Noah's eyes gradually narrowed. Is that the Purgatory Apostles? Without a doubt, that was the Purgatory Apostles that represented the Alpha's empire. In other words, Renasubble was among those people. However, what made Noah more surprised was that among the Purgatory Apostles, there was a person who was obviously shorter in stature. Although the other party covered herself tightly with a black robe, Noah, with his superb sensing ability, was able to distinguish the other party's aura. It was clearly the aura of the girl who called herself Mauya who attacked Noah and Leola last night. So, she's a member of the Purgatory Apostles? Noah's eyes flashed. So, the sister she mentioned, could it be Renasubble? If that was the case, then everything made sense. In addition, among the group of Purgatory Apostles, Noah also felt a very strange aura from one of them. How should he describe that aura? Hot. That's right, hot. That person's aura was too hot, so hot that it seemed to be able to completely burn the air. That aura was even above Grey and Vaz, and even close to Renasubble's. Feeling that aura, Noah slightly frowned. Could it be that she's the person that Lestia mentioned is as scary as Renasubble? If that was the case, then Lestia wasn't lying. Bang! Just as Noah was lost in thought, a bonfire suddenly burned on the altar. Behind the bonfire, 5 princess-like witch maids in luxurious outfits slowly appeared and bowed in unison. Those are the elf concubines who serve the 5 elf kings. Fianna whispered to Noah. There's almost no chance to see them directly like this, you have to cherish it. Fianna's tone was a bit complicated. That was to be expected. After Rubia Elstian betrayed the elf king, Fianna should have inherited her position and become the new elf concubine. However, at that time, Fianna had already lost her ability as an elf envoy and was forced to withdraw from the election, becoming the so-called lost elf concubine. Now, looking at the 5 elf concubines on the high platform, Fianna's emotions were definitely complicated. However, Fianna's emotions did not stop the flow of time. The appearance of the 5 elf concubines was only to announce the content of the Elven Sword Dance Festival. First, the stage of the Elven Sword Dance Festival was a vast forest area in the north of the floating island. It was a dangerous area where wild magic beasts and wild elves ran rampant. The representatives of each country would be randomly sent in teams and would compete in the competition for 7 days. Meanwhile, each country's representative contestant would receive a special spirit organ. That L4 was called a magic stone. The outcome of the competition would be decided by the magic stones. The contestants had to carry the magic stones with them. Once a magic stone was taken away, they had to take it back within 1 minute. Otherwise, the small teleportation array in the magic stone would activate and forcibly teleport the contestant who lost the magic stone back to the Great Shrine. This competition would last for 7 days, and the 4 teams with the most magic stones would be chosen in the end. The 4 teams would then hold the finals to determine the winner. After announcing the content of the competition, the 5 elf concubines formed a hand seal. Clank. On the altar, the teleportation array began to blossom with light, illuminating the entire altar. At this moment, the competition officially began. Okay. Noah looked at his 4 teammates. Let's go in. Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice all took a deep breath and heavily nodded at the same time. Under the cheers of the audience, all the contestants began to step into the teleportation array and disappeared in the light. Noah also led the girls and stepped into the teleportation array. Suddenly, Noah raised his head and looked in a direction. There, Lotus Asubble raised her head and revealed her delicate and pretty face, looking at him. While looking at each other, Noah and Lotus slowly disappeared in the light. What could be called a predestined showdown was merely the announcement of the start. Chapter 1770. Whoosh! An extremely cold gale blew through the space, causing the temperature in the air to suddenly drop a lot, reaching a degree comparable to the cold of winter. Although this was a vast forest, it was still somewhat gloomy. A hazy mist filled the air. The cries of birds and beasts could be heard from afar. In the forest, low-ranked fairies floated aimlessly like balls of light, emitting a faint halo. Whoosh! The cold wind blew through the forest, blowing away the hazy mist. However, it quickly brought back the mist from afar, causing the visibility to become even lower. Those light ball-like fairies weren't affected at all. They continued to float back and forth in the space, appearing very unique. In a dazzling light, Noah's group was teleported to the depths of the forest. As soon as he appeared, Claire, Fianna, and Alice's group all shuddered at the same time. Ah! Fianna let out a sorrowful cry and hugged her body tightly. It's so cold, yeah. Even Alice, who had a contract with a wind fairy, couldn't help but shudder. Her lips were pale as she spoke. Why is it so cold here? Cold? Lindsay Lay, on the other hand, brushed her long hair back as usual, completely unaffected by it. Is it cold? I don't think so. Don't compare us to you. Claire glanced at Linley. You're not only an ice fairy, but your hometown is also in the snowy mountains at the border. How can you feel cold? It is indeed cold at the border. Noah reached out his hand and brushed the cold wind around them. It should be because this place is at the northern border of the floating island, so it's cold, right? In fact, if it weren't for the fact that Noah's group was wearing the Alicia Elven Academy's student uniform, they would be shivering from the cold. The Alicia Elven Academy's student uniform was protected by elven magic. Not only did it protect them from the cold, but it also provided some protection no matter what kind of environment they were in. And under such circumstances, the group of girls except for Linley still felt cold. One could imagine how cold it would be without the protection of the uniform. However, Linsley, who was used to the harsh environment of the snowy mountain, was disdainful of this degree of cold. When Noah was young, he had practiced cultivation in the deep mountains and forests for several years. During that time, he had also encountered various harsh environments, so he had developed a certain immunity to the cold. Therefore, other than Noah and Linley, the other girls felt very cold. Finally, Claire couldn't take it anymore and reached out a hand. Flames, burn. A flame suddenly ignited in Claire's hand and turned into a fireball, illuminating the surroundings and releasing a warm heat. Frianna and Alice immediately approached and put their hands on it. Frianna heaved a sigh of relief. "We're saved, this is ridiculous," Linley said as if she couldn't take it anymore. "If I can't even withstand this level of cold, what should I do next?" Claire and Alice suddenly remembered after hearing Linley's words. The competition would last for a whole 7 days. If they couldn't stand this environment now, then what would they do at night? Only Frianna was smiling calmly. "Don't worry, as long as we find a place to settle down, I will set up multiple barriers there and turn it into our stronghold. When the time comes, we will add a cold barrier and be able to sleep comfortably at night." Hearing this, the group of girls felt relieved. Noah also nodded in agreement. A stronghold was very important. At least, with a stronghold protected by layers of barriers, Noah's group didn't have to worry about being attacked and could sleep comfortably at night. Moreover, as a former elven maiden candidate, the barriers set up by Frianna were definitely not as simple as protection. Frianna could rely on her superb ritual music to set up all kinds of barriers to protect the elven users, greatly increasing the strength of the elven users, and displaying all kinds of blessings such as eliminating fatigue, which would be of great help in battle. It's not just a battle. I can also set up a trap enchantment to make our enemies unable to return. I can also tame the wild spirits within the enchantment and make them help us fight, Frianna said with great confidence. The other teams will definitely build a stronghold as soon as possible, but in terms of the level of the stronghold, I'm confident that it won't lose to any team. This way, with this stronghold, the safety of the team could be guaranteed. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Claire, Linley, and Alice immediately clapped. "As expected of your highness, the former elven maiden candidate, so reliable." Hearing this, Frianna smiled bitterly. "But that's all I can do. In terms of fighting, I can only rely on you guys. My fighting ability isn't very strong." In any case, Frianna had never been trained by an orthodox elven user. Instead, she had been studying in the gods' parliament and had a deep understanding of ritualistic music. However, in terms of sword dance, she was weaker than all the elven users in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. Not to mention other things, Frianna hadn't even learned how to use the elven device, so she wouldn't be of much use in battle. Of course, in terms of defense, I can still be of some use. Frianna sighed. At least, there shouldn't be many elven users who can break Geochias's shield. Then, I can provide you with ritualistic music in battle. That's enough. Noah smiled slightly. You just need to let the contracted elves protect you. The rest is to concentrate on the ritualistic music. Leave the rest to us. Claire, Linley, and Alice all nodded, which made Frianna's expression look much better. "So, what kind of place should we look for as our base?" Alice looked around at her surroundings. "This doesn't seem very suitable." "That's true," Noah said after pondering for a while. "If possible, it's ideal to find a small hill that's easy to defend and hard to attack. However, we still have to consider the problem of food and water, so it's better to set up a base not far from a river or lake." Everyone nodded. During the Elven Sword Dance Festival, the contestants could bring some necessities with them, but there was a limit to the weight. In other words, they could only bring items up to a certain weight. Anything more than that would be considered a violation of the rules. Because of this, everyone put their necessities in Noah's gift card, but the things they could take out were limited. Otherwise, with Mila and Lisanna preparing large amounts of food and water for Noah, they wouldn't have to worry about this problem at all. Moreover, food was one thing, but the water source was very important. As an elven envoy, Magus G had to maintain the purity of her body at all times. Otherwise, the holiness of her body would decrease, and her ability to communicate with the elves would be reduced. If her body was too dirty, she might not even be able to summon the elves, let alone command them or even fight. Therefore, it was very important to be able to bathe in water and wash away the filth on her body. The elven envoys of the other teams should be showing off their skills and looking for a base and opponent, right? Noah looked at Alice. Alice, can I trouble you to summon a few wind elves to scout the surroundings? Can I? It wasn't Alice who said this. It was Claire who said this. The competition has already begun. Wouldn't it be too conspicuous to use elven magic at this time? Conspicuous? Noah laughed. If we can attract 1 or 2 teams like this, that would be ideal. As long as it wasn't the Purgatory Apostles, no matter what kind of team they were, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. With me holding the fort and Fianna's protection, we can fight without worry. I believe that we won't lose. The hearts of the group of young girls suddenly felt their blood boiling. Chapter 1771. In the depths of the misty forest, Fianna held a round fan used for ritual and danced gracefully like a cool breeze caressing her face. Ding ding ding. Every time Fianna danced, the bell at the end of the round fan in her hand would make a pleasant sound, like a beautiful melody, rhythmically reverberating in the air. Clang. Following Fianna's dance, the ground began to blossom with splendor. Bathed in the splendor, Claire, Linley, and Alice all felt it. Their state was growing at a very frightening rate. The godly power flowing in their bodies gradually changed from a slow-moving stream to a roaring torrent. Their bodies seemed to have inexhaustible strength, and hot streams burst forth from every corner. That kind of feeling made the group of young girls let out satisfied sounds, and their expressions became somewhat excited. At this moment, the group of girls all received the blessing of Fianna's ritual music, and their strength showed a qualitative leap. In this state, if their original fighting strength was about 2 or 3, then after the blessing of the ritual music, it became 4 or 5. In other words, under the blessing of Fianna's ritual music, the group of girls' fighting strength nearly doubled. As if to strike while the iron was hot, Alice chanted an incantation composed of Elvish. Wind, please bring me a gift from afar, grant me a peeping eye. Suddenly, bird-like elves slowly appeared around Alice like flickering light spots. After hovering around Alice for a while, they immediately spread their wings and flew in all directions. Almost at the same time, Claire and Linley also chanted the contract used to summon elves. Guardian of the red flames, keeper of the sleepless furnace, here to fulfill the blood contract, listen to my command, cold beasts with ice fangs, heartless hunters of the forest, here to fulfill the blood contract, listen to my command. The elven mark on the back of the 2 girls' hands flashed at the same time. In the next second, a flaming whip and a crystal-like bow appeared in Claire's and Linley's hands, tightly gripping them in their hands. Immediately after, Claire and Linley stood on either side of Fianna, who was performing the ritual, and Alice, who was concentrating on commanding the wind elves used for investigation, protecting the 2. Looking at this scene, Noah nodded secretly. Although they had been separated for an entire month, the tacit understanding that they had developed during their training as a team had not disappeared. Thus, Noah also moved lightly and arrived behind the group of girls to provide support for them. Around them, fairies that looked like balls of light danced around them. It was a servant spirit trained by which G of the Gods' Parliament. It was in charge of transmitting the images of the competition back to the great sacrificial hall so that everyone could see the entire process clearly. Aren't you coming with us? Give me some time. Noah turned around, his back facing the group of girls, his voice softly drifting into everyone's ears. I want to go and greet some acquaintances first. At the same time, in a forest clearing a few hundred meters away from where Noah and the others were, the bird-like wind spirit fell down as if its wings were broken, gradually turning into light particles and disappearing. The black-robed Lily looked at the gradually disappearing wind spirit on the ground, slightly twirling the dagger in her hand, as if deep in thought. Beside her, Malia seemed bored as she lifted her hood, and said, "There's already a team that has set their sights on us so quickly. It shouldn't be that we're being targeted, it's just some random scouting by another team." Lily shook her head. "I shot it down immediately just now, so the opponent doesn't even know which team it was that shot down her wind spirit, right? They didn't even have time to send back the information?" Malia smiled innocently. As expected of Lily, she's the best at such little tricks. In the Purgatory Apostles team, the elfie girl named Lily wasn't the best at direct combat, but excellent scouting. In this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival, there was probably no one better at scouting than Lily. Therefore, Lily's anti-scouting ability was also excellent, and she instantly discovered the wind spirit that came to scout. Compared to Lily, Malia didn't have so many little tricks, and she didn't even know how to cook. However, Malia was a super expert who was trained as an elven master who specialized in using military elves, and her body was even implanted with spell engravings that could maximize the power of military elves to the greatest extent. In terms of combat ability, as long as Malia had enough military elves to command, even 10 Lilies wouldn't be a match for her. It was also because of this that in Malia's eyes, Lily's actions were just little tricks. And Lily naturally understood this point, so she ignored Malia, turned around, and looked at Red Lotus, who was standing silently by the side. "Lady Red Lotus, do you need me to see who sent that wind spirit?" This sentence attracted a somewhat pretentious voice. "Why don't you let me have some fun?" Chapter 1772. Why don't you let me have some fun? With such a voice, the atmosphere in the entire space became tense. Soon after, a young woman seemed to appear out of nowhere behind Hong Lian, Malia, and Lily. She slowly walked forward. It was a girl with beautiful blue hair that was cut to the side of her neck. The bright color of her hair was quite eye-catching. She was wearing a flirtatious dancer's costume and had a thin veil covering the lower half of her face. She was a young girl that seemed out of place with the other members of the Purgatory Apostles. The young girl had a hazy smile on her face as she said so. "Although the Elven Sword Dance Festival has just begun, I can't wait to go hunting." The young girl's words made Lily frown and made Malia show an unhappy expression. However, it did not make Red Lotus waver in the slightest. Even if she was wearing a mask that could cover all her face, Red Lotus' calmness could be clearly seen by everyone. Therefore, Red Lotus did not even turn her head and said so with an almost emotionless voice. "It's fine if you want to act on your own, but if you hinder me because of this, you should know the consequences." Hearing this, the young girl slightly raised her eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "That's really scary, but do you dare to make a move against me?" The young girl's words were not without reason. The young girl's name was Sarah Khan. She was the princess of the Alpha Empire and also the 5th member of the Purgatory Apostles. Although she was a member, in fact, as seen on the surface, Sarah was very out of place in the Purgatory Apostles. The reason was very simple. It was because Sarah was not on the same side as the others. No. It should be said that the Purgatory Apostles were not on the same side in the first place. Lotus accepted Red Lotus' invitation to join the Purgatory Apostles because she wanted to be able to fight Noah. Red Lotus connected with the Alpha Empire for her own purpose and attempted to use the Alpha Empire to sneak into the Elven Sword Dance Festival. She even wanted to obtain enough benefits from the Alpha Empire. Malia and Lily were the same as Lotus. They were both orphans in the academy. The difference was that Malia maintained an almost morbid longing for Lotus. No matter what, she only listened to Lotus. Lily was unusually loyal to Red Lotus and gave her everything to Red Lotus. Because of this, the two of them became the 3rd and 4th members of the Purgatory Apostles, barely forming a team. As for Sarah, she was completely sent by the Alpha Empire to monitor the rest of the people. Therefore, this team was not united at all. Instead, it was truly fragmented. At the very least, Sarah would never be completely devoted to Red Lotus. As the princess of the Alphys Empire, Sarah did not believe that Red Lotus, who had been using the name of the Alphys Empire in all aspects, would attack her at this time. However, this confidence was quickly. Red Lotus's entire body seemed to be burning with flames. Red light rippled from the outline of her body. She turned her head, and under the ghostly mask, a pair of eyes that seemed to be emitting scarlet light was nailed to Sarah's body. "Do you want to give it a try, witch?" Sensing the terrifying aura emanating from Hong Lian's body, the smile on Sarah's face froze. After a moment of silence, she raised her hand in surrender. Okay, I'm just kidding. Don't take it so seriously." Red Lotus did not say anything else. Instead, she looked straight at Sarah. When the smile on Sarah's face began to change, Red Lotus withdrew her gaze and said, "You should understand. The Alpha Empire provided me with an identity so that I could participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. They even provided Maoyo with military elves. That's just a deal. You support us, and we will use the victory of the Elven Sword Dance Festival as a reward to let the Alpha Empire obtain the protection of the Elven King. To put it bluntly, we are using each other. So, put away your so-called princess act and don't test my patience." Sarah couldn't help but feel a little angry when she heard his rude words. However, she had to admit that Sarah did not have the right to be angry. Just like what Red Lotus said, they were only using each other with the Alpha Empire. That was why the Alpha Empire sent Sarah to monitor Red Lotus and the others. In other words, Red Lotus was only being monitored by the Alpha Empire. She was not being allowed to do whatever she wanted. If Sarah had really ruined the plan that Red Lotus had painstakingly planned because of her unauthorized actions, Red Lotus would definitely not mind killing Sarah. Unfortunately, Sarah had not found a way to fight against Red Lotus yet. Left with no choice, Sarah could only swallow her anger in her heart. However, since Sarah was called the witch, she was not someone to be trifled with. "I'll remember what happened today. Don't give me a chance." With that thought in mind, Sarah suddenly thought of something. She turned her head and looked in another direction. Her eyes glowed as if she was staring at her prey. "Besides, my mission is not just to monitor you." As far as Sarah's eyes could see, Lotus had been silently looking into the distance. Her black robe fluttered in the wind. Even her long black hair that reached her waist swayed. There was no expression on her delicate face. She looked very illusory. That scene caused Sarah's entire body to tremble when she saw it. "She's so beautiful. She's so beautiful that I can't help but want to destroy her." The Alpha Empire was the base of the Demon King's faith. It was the birthplace of the former Demon King Solomon. Of course, there were as many people in the Alpha Empire who had their eyes on the Demon King. Sarah was one of them. "The Demon King belongs to me. No one can take him away," Sarah thought silently in her heart. At this moment, Lily's eyes suddenly widened as she yelled out, Hey! Watch out!" As soon as her voice fell. Buzz! Accompanied by the sound of the air trembling, a huge beam of light suddenly fell from the sky. It streaked across the space and shot directly in the direction of the Purgatory Apostles. Everyone's expression changed one after another. In the next moment, the beam of light fell from the sky heavily on the open space where the Purgatory Apostles were. Boom! A deafening roar resounded. The huge beam of light directly blasted the ground, setting off a shocking blast and terrifying flames. Like a big explosion, it shook and suddenly swept across the surroundings. In an instant, the ground was blown up inch by inch. Pieces of gravel and debris splashed in all directions. The trees closest to the open space were also as if they were hit by a hurricane. Under the shocking blast, they were crushed and fell together. They were covered by the flames that swept across and burned. In just a moment, the entire open space was as if it was attacked by artillery. It turned into a tragic sea of fire. As a result, the Purgatory Apostles were blown away by the blast. Maya, Lily, and Sarah directly rolled on the ground, looking extremely miserable. At the moment when Lotus and Red Lotus were blown away, their bodies suddenly spun and landed very steadily on the ground. Their soles rubbed against the ground and they flew all the way, leaving 2 faint traces on the ground. Who? Red Lotus raised her head, and her voice was unprecedentedly cold. Come out. Lotus, on the other hand, suddenly clutched her heart and her eyes began to shake. Because, at this moment, Lotus could feel that her heart was throbbing violently. In Lotus' memory, there was only one person who could make her heart react like this. Is he here? Lotus looked at the sea of fire in front of her with a dignified expression. He actually came so quickly. Hearing Lotus' words, Red Lotus seemed to understand something. Her eyes began to flicker as she looked straight ahead. There, the sea of fire was slowly burning, and the originally cold space began to glow and heat up. Then, Lotus and Red Lotus both saw it. In the sea of fire, a figure slowly walked out. Not only was there not a trace of dust on his pure white uniform, but even the flames attached to it did not burn. Then, the newcomer met Lotus and Red Lotus' gaze, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. It really is you. It couldn't be better if I guessed correctly. Chapter 1773. The Purgatory Apostles were dumbfounded when they saw the person walking towards them from within the sea of fire. It's really him, Red Lotus whispered. Big brother? Maya was surprised. It's him? Lily's face was tense. A male elven envoy? Sarah, on the other hand, was extremely angry at her own wretched appearance. Then, she looked at Noah in surprise. Naturally, the Alpha Theocracy would not fail to notice Noah's appearance. After all, the only male elven envoy in history was the demon king Solomon. Not long ago, when Noah appeared as a male elven envoy, the higher-ups of the Alpha Theocracy were excited. They thought that the demon king had reincarnated into Noah's body. It was not until later that Red Lotus revealed that Renasubal was the real demon king. The higher-ups of the Alpha Theocracy threw Noah aside and no longer cared about him. However, in terms of intelligence, the Alpha Theocracy had more or less grasped a part of it. Therefore, Sarah was still aware of Noah's existence. She also knew that Ren's target for participating in the Elven Sword Dance Festival was him. Thinking of this, Sarah's eyes turned slightly. A sinister light appeared in her eyes as she looked at Noah. Since Renasubal cares so much about him, if I can capture him. As soon as this plan appeared in Sarah's mind, a line of sight suddenly locked onto Sarah. At this moment, Sarah only felt as if she was being stared at by a terrifying existence. All the pores on her body suddenly exploded. Then, Sarah realized. The male elven envoy with the sea of fire as the background was staring at her with a pair of deep, dark eyes. Immediately, Sarah heard such a sentence. Although I don't know who you are, the way you look at me makes me feel very uncomfortable. After saying that, a gorgeous magic square suddenly rotated in front of Noah. An astonishing amount of magic power gathered inside and turned into a beam of light. Like a meteor, it streaked across the space and shot towards Sarah's direction. Dong! The beam of light landed right in front of Sarah, exploding the ground. The sudden burst of wind blew Sarah away before she could react. She crashed heavily into a tree trunk not far away. The intense pain from her back caused Sarah to let out a muffled groan. Following which, her body slid down the tree trunk and collapsed onto the ground. The entire place fell silent. You. Lily's expression changed abruptly. She took a few steps back and became alert. Clearly, Lily did not expect Noah to launch an attack as soon as he appeared. Moreover, he did not show any mercy. No, Noah was already being very lenient. Otherwise, that blow wouldn't have landed on the ground. Instead, it would have landed on Sarah and blasted her into smithereens. No matter what, the Elven Sword Dance Festival does not allow the killing of contestants. I have already shown mercy." As he said this, Noah turned his head and glanced at the silent Hong Lian. Then, he looked at Lotus and said with a faint smile, "Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you anything." "How is it? Do you like this surprise?" Lotus did not answer. Instead, she slowly got up. On the back of her hand, an elven inscription flickered and sputtered out pitch-black lightning. The pitch-black lightning burst out in front of Lotus and gradually converged. It transformed into a pitch-black, ominous-looking demon sword that was stabbed straight into the ground. Vorpal's sword, penetrating truth. The demon sword formed by the highest-ranking dark elf under the Demon King was now standing in front of Lotus. However, Lotus did not pull out the pitch-black demon sword. Instead, she stared at Noah and spoke softly. "I didn't expect you to find me when the competition has just begun. I thought our duel would be left until the finals. That's normal. After all, the more exciting things are, the more they should be left until the end. That's the true meaning of the competition," Noah said calmly. "So, I thought, why don't I greet you first and see what kind of people your teammates are?" As soon as he finished speaking, the elven inscription on the back of Noah's hand also flashed and emitted a dazzling light. It was an extremely beautiful white light. In the white light, a burst of light particles flashed like stars and turned into a small galaxy. After circling around Noah's body for a while, it landed on the ground. The next moment, a silver holy sword formed from the light particles. Like the pitch-black demon sword, it was stabbed into the ground upside down. Demon Slayer. The holy sword formed by the strongest sword elf that had once annihilated Demon King Solomon stood in front of Noah. Noah and Lotus raised their eyes and stared at each other. Their gazes met in mid-air, causing extremely intense sparks to fly between them. In the next second, the two disappeared at the same time. The holy sword and the demon sword that were stabbed into the ground also disappeared without a trace. And almost at the same time, the two people holding the silver holy sword and the pitch-black demon sword suddenly appeared in the center of the field. The elven devices in their hands carried the power of 1,000 caddies. One of them was like a sweeping army, while the other was like a falling thunder. They heavily hacked at each other. Clang! When the bell-like sound of metal clashing resounded through the entire space, an extremely ferocious divine energy fluctuation violently surged out from the center of the field, extinguishing the sea of fire in a radius of several dozen meters around the holy sword and demonic sword that were clashing together. The silver holy sword and the pitch-black demon sword constantly rubbed against each other, creating extremely strong sparks. The eyes of Noah and Lotus, who were looking at each other through the elven devices, burned with red light. Wang! Gorgeous white light and pitch-black lightning bloomed from the swords of the elven devices at the same time. They intertwined with each other, as if they were fighting for territory. They went back and forth, causing the space to tremble. Immediately, Lotus suddenly withdrew. The demon's sword in her hand strangely turned. The tip of the sword directly rubbed against the edge of the holy sword, creating a burst of sparks. She violently slashed in the direction of Noah and suddenly stabbed at him. A sharp sound of breaking air and an ear-piercing sound of friction resounded. However, at the same time, Noah suddenly tightened his grip on the holy sword in his hand, as if he was blocking the demon's sword that was rubbing against the edge of the holy sword. Without any warning, he suddenly flicked his sword upwards. Clang! Under the crisp sound of collision, the demon's sword that was violently stabbing at Noah's direction was suddenly flicked away. This caused Lotus' figure to shake. Her whole body was shaken and her whole body was shaken back, causing her front to be exposed. At this moment, Noah suddenly took a step back. The holy sword in his hand was suffused with a gorgeous light. Absolute sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. A lightning-like stab was released from Noah's hand. It turned into a cold light that was like a meteor. It mercilessly stabbed at Lotus' exposed front. The lightning-like stab caused the strong wind from the tip of the sword to scrape Lotus' body like a blade, causing her skin to feel a tingling sensation. At this moment, Lotus' eyes hardened. Without any hesitation, she gave up on stabilizing her body. The tip of her foot twisted on the ground. Her body spun like she was dancing. The demon sword that was flicked away drew a perfect arc and slashed in the direction of Noah. Absolute sword skill. Third form Shadow Moon Dance. The third form, which was originally suitable for group attacks, was actually used by Lotus at this moment. As a result, the moonlight-like slash cut across the space. It was like a cold light, but also like a gentle moonlight. With an unconcealable sharpness, it swept in front of Lotus like a thunderbolt. It just happened to meet the holy sword that was thrusting at her like lightning. Clang! The sound of steel colliding with steel reverberated in the air. It was mixed with bursting sparks that suddenly appeared in the space. Under the sudden appearance of the sparks, Noah and Lotus both seemed to be sent flying. They quickly retreated. The tips of their feet repeatedly tapped on the ground, and they moved like rabbits running away from each other. Lily and Mao Ye's faces were filled with shock at this scene. Red Lotus eyes also focused little by little. From the beginning of the conflict between the two people, to the fierce exchange, to being sent flying at the same time, the whole process took less than 10 seconds. Within those 10 seconds, a sword dance of a level that ordinary elves would find hard to imagine was displayed in front of everyone present. Chapter 1774. Clang. Dazzling white light continuously flashed from the demon slayer and dyed the surrounding sea of fire into a vast expanse of white. Wang. Not to be outdone, a pitch-black lightning blossomed from the Vorpal sword. Holding the famous holy sword and demon sword in their hands, Noah and Lotus looked at each other, suppressing their emotions from the sword dance just now. If they didn't do so, the two of them would definitely attack each other again, recklessly charging at each other. Unfortunately, whether it was Noah or Lotus, they were not the kind of people who would be manipulated by their emotions, causing them to reveal flaws. Therefore, the two of them could only silently suppress their inner emotions, and at the same time silently looked at each other. Both of them could see the burning emotions in each other's eyes. Tightly holding the silver holy sword that shone with dazzling white light, Noah murmured in a low voice. As elven users who both use absolute sword skills, it seems that it will be very difficult to determine the winner in this aspect. At the very most, Noah had learned the absolute sword skills for less than half a year. Lotus, on the other hand, had learned the absolute sword skills from Gray and Vath after escaping from the teaching academy 4 years ago. In terms of time, the proficiency of the absolute sword skills that the two of them had mastered was not at the same level at all. However, the power of the absolute sword skills that Noah used was not below that of Lotus. The reason was not that Noah was more talented than Lotus in swordsmanship, but because the Godslayer would become stronger as long as he fought. In less than half a year, Noah had improved his absolute sword skills. But even so, if they only used the absolute sword skills, Noah was still unable to suppress Lotus. It could be seen that Lotus was talented in swordsmanship and how long she had been immersed in it. Lotus seemed to have the same feeling, looking straight at Noah, and said so. It seems that if we only compete in swordsmanship, we won't be able to determine the winner. An extremely dense darkness began to fluctuate from Lotus's body. So, I'll have to show some of my true abilities. As she said this, the dense darkness that fluctuated from Lotus's body turned into a fierce divine power, madly pouring into Lotus's body. Wang. Instantly, the elven device in Lotus's hand, named Vorpal Sword, emitted an even deeper black lightning. It grew stronger and stronger, to the point where one's eyeballs started to hurt from the intensity of the lightning. Feeling the surging divine power continuously pouring into Lotus's body, Noah's eyes gradually narrowed. Noah could clearly feel it. Lotus's aura once every second. The divine power of energy that Lotus's aura, and Lotus's aura, it was extremely of Lotus's aura. Of Lotus's, of course, of Lotus's, of Lotus, of course, Lotus's body, Lotus's of his of, Lotus, of Lotus, of Lotus, of Lotus. Soon after, Lotus slowly opened her mouth. The Elven King is the embodiment of the world's elements, a transcendent existence that is in charge of the world's elements. My body contains the power of the Dark Elven King, and this power is related to it in my heart, so I can perfectly control it. Do you know what this means? While speaking, the dark flames burning from Lotus's body continued to expand, and Lotus's aura also continued to strengthen. It means that like the Elven King, I can control the world's elements. Whether it's the human world or the world of elemental elves, the element of darkness will fall under my control. I can obtain power comparable to the Elven King, and by continuously absorbing the element of darkness, I can transform it into endless divine power. I can even let my body undergo rapid regeneration, making it eternal. What you need to face is this kind of power. The dark flames burning from Lotus's body had already expanded to the point where they soared into the sky, and into the clouds. Finally, when it had expanded to the limit, Lotus's aura had skyrocketed to the point where Noah had to face it. At this moment, Noah could feel a faint threat from Lotus's body. At the same time, Lotus's aura also told Noah the extent of her power. That aura was already more powerful than Naz, who had obtained Ignir's power. And Naz, who had obtained Ignir's power, was infinitely close to 4 digits. More powerful than Naz at that time, which meant that Lotus had reached that level. 4 digits. That was already enough of a threat. Noah smiled. His smile was very pleasant. Very good. Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying divine power also skyrocketed from Noah's body, turning into a huge phosphorescent beam of light. It stirred the air, and in the tremor of space, soared into the sky, straight into the clouds, forming a contrast with the dark flame pillar. Although I don't have the power of the Elven King, my Aster's power is not inferior to the Elven King's. I can't control the elements of the human world and the elemental world to obtain an eternal body, but if it's just endless divine power, I also have it. Noah pointed the demon slayer in his hand that was emitting a dazzling white light at Lotus, whose pupils were slowly shrinking, and made a declaration in an unrestrained manner. The strongest sword dancer, the successor of the Demon King, the reincarnation of the Dark Elven King, do you want to compete with me to see who is stronger? The astonishing divine power was like a violent hurricane, turning into a dazzling beam of light that soared into the sky, while stirring up layers of waves of impact, stirring up the surrounding atmosphere, and causing the ground where Noah was standing to shake slightly. In response, Lotus only raised the demon's sword in her hand, and a smile appeared on her delicate face. You are indeed very strong. This is good. If not, then I can't verify whether my fate should be changed by you. After saying that, Lotus also pointed the elven magic device at Noah, and loudly declared, "Come. Prove that you are stronger than me." The dense darkness that swelled from Lotus' body became violent, as if it was stirring up the atmosphere of the entire world, repeatedly shaking. Under such circumstances, the atmosphere in the space became more and more tense, causing Maoya and Lily, who were suppressed in place by the 2 terrifying powers, to hold their breaths, and their faces became pale little by little. Just as this unprecedented battle was about to break out, Noah suddenly changed the topic. However, let's leave this matter for later. After saying that, the terrifying divine power that burst out from Noah's body dissipated in the air little by little, and finally completely disappeared. Maoya was stunned. Lily was stunned. Even Lotus was stunned on the spot, and for a moment, she didn't have time to react. I've said it before. I'm just here to say hello. Noah shrugged. Being able to confirm the extent of your true strength is already a great gain. As he spoke, Noah glanced to the side and curled his lips into a smile. Besides, if I continue to fight with Lotus Asubble, you won't continue to watch, right? Miss Unknown? Lotus seemed to remember something and looked to the side. There, wearing a ghostly mask, Red Lotus was staring straight at Noah, a faint flame fluctuating from her body. While everyone was stunned by the power of Noah and Lotus, Red Lotus was the only one who didn't show any abnormality. And the aura that fluctuated from Red Lotus' body made Noah certain that this person was not simple. Although I am very curious about you, it is somewhat troublesome to face the two of you at once. Today's greeting will end here." Noah looked at Lotus. "See you next time, Lord Demon King." As soon as he finished speaking, Noah tapped the tip of his foot and leaped backward. He leaped into the burning sea of fire and disappeared. Lily stood up almost reflexively, but was greeted by Red Lotus' indifferent voice. "Don't chase, even if you catch up, you are not his opponent." Lily froze in place and fell silent. Lotus stared in the direction where Noah disappeared, her eyes never moving, standing in place for a long time without moving. Chapter 1775. In a distant corner of the forest, the sea of fire was still burning slowly, causing the trees to be set ablaze one by one, slowly expanding the range of the fire. Under such circumstances, many fire elves in the forest began to rush towards the direction of the sea of fire excitedly, while many water elves came to the edge of the sea of fire and began to extinguish the fire in an attempt to stop the spread of the sea of fire. It wasn't that these elves loved this forest, but that the water elves didn't like the environment of the sea of fire, so they wanted to extinguish the fire. As for the other elves in the forest, they also began to get busy. Some left the sea of fire, while some rushed towards the sea of fire, causing the originally gloomy forest to become lively. Among these elves, there must be elves enslaved by the other participants of the Elven Sword Dance Festival, right? After all, with such a huge commotion, it would attract the attention of the other participants no matter what. Those elven envoys who discovered the commotion would definitely be eager to know what was happening in the direction of the sea of fire. Hence, it wasn't strange for the elven envoys to investigate. However, just as these elven envoys were rushing towards the direction of the sea of fire, a figure flew over like a ray of light in the opposite direction and landed on an empty ground, revealing his full appearance. Sensing that many elven envoys were rushing towards the direction of the sea of fire, Noah couldn't help but spread his hands slightly. "Have we gone a little too far?" The Elven Sword Dance Festival had just begun. Therefore, the reason why Noah found trouble with the Purgatory Apostles was really just to greet the Purgatory Apostles. Of course, it wasn't on a whim. Noah just wanted to test the strength of the elven envoys in the Purgatory Apostles. After the commotion, Noah felt a little more confident in his heart. Moya, Lily, and Sarah were not worth mentioning to Noah at all. However, Lotus's strength, Noah finally tested it out. The strength of the Dark Elven King really can't be underestimated. The Elven King who ruled over the various elements that made up the world and ruled over all the elves. To put it in an extreme way, these existences were the world itself. In the Elven Wars of the ancient era, the Dark Elven King was able to fight against the other 5 Elven Kings by himself. One could well imagine how powerful the Dark Elven King was. Thinking back to Claire, her elder sister betrayed the Fire Elf King. In a fit of rage, the Fire Elf King unleashed a continuous stream of fire on the entire Ordesia Empire, almost destroying it. As an existence that could fight against the other 5 Elf Kings at the same time, the Dark Elf King shouldn't be weaker than the Fire Elf King, right? At the very least, it could destroy an entire country in the blink of an eye. Now, because of the world fragment, it was completely controlled by a human. No matter how useless this human was, he could still threaten the entire world. Take the former demon King Solomon for example. Even though he was devoured by the power of the Dark Elf King and completely turned into a lump of resentment, he still almost destroyed the entire continent. As an existence who had perfect control of that power, Lotus's strength could only be stronger than Solomon's. Thus, long before, Noah more or less had some guesses about Lotus's strength. Even Aconarolia, who also destroyed a huge country, can reach 4 digits. It's not strange that Lotus can reach 4 digits. As he muttered to himself, Noah fell into deep thought. But that masked elven envoy, even when Lotus and I revealed our true strength, she was still able to remain calm. Could it be that she really has the same level of strength as Lotus? If that was really the case, then it meant that there were 2 4-digit existences among the Purgatory Apostles. Even if it was Noah, facing 2 4-digit existences, he would only have a headache. It's just that I have the power of the strongest sword elf, and Lotus has the power of the dark elf king, in addition to endless divine power. Only then can they reach 4 digits. If that masked elven envoy can also reach 4 digits, then what is she relying on? Noah's brows slightly furrowed. Even if she contracted with a mythical level elf, she shouldn't be able to reach 4 digits, right? Although mythical level elves were second only to the elven king, compared to the elven king who governed the elements that made up the entire world, it was estimated that the difference was more than just a little. Even if she contracted a mythical level elf, it was already very strong to reach 5 digits. No matter what, she shouldn't be able to reach 4 digits. But if Red Lotus was only at 5 digits, it was absolutely impossible for her to be so calm in front of Noah and Lotus, who had exploded with 4-digit power. There must be something I don't know, Noah asserted. This trip was indeed the right one. To be able to test Lotus's general strength and learn some of Red Lotus's abilities, this trip was already very rewarding for Noah. Moreover, Noah could also be sure that among the Purgatory Apostles, besides Lotus and Red Lotus, there was no third person that he needed to pay attention to. To be able to obtain this information, that's enough. Although he still didn't know what Red Lotus's specific strength and reliance was, as long as the fairy sword dance was not stopped, sooner or later, Noah would have to face her. When that time comes, everything will naturally be revealed. Thinking about this, Noah was just about to lift his feet and leave when the fairy device in his hands suddenly lit up and turned into a burst of light particles. Immediately after, Aster appeared from the light particles. Aster? Noah was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Aster to suddenly appear. Master. Aster, on the other hand, had a very rare hesitant look, a pair of mysterious eyes filled with uncertainty. Seeing this, Noah was somewhat suspicious. He reached out his hand, touched Aster's head, and asked, "What's wrong?" Hearing this, Aster still looked a little hesitant. But after a while, Aster lifted his head, looked at Noah, and said, "What do you think?" The masked fairy envoy gave me a very familiar feeling. A very familiar feeling? Noah was stunned, and was surprised. Do you know the masked fairy envoy? No, in my memory, I have never seen a fairy envoy with such a scorching aura. Aster shook his head. But, in that person's aura, I do feel a very familiar feeling. Saying this, Aster slowly lowered his head as he muttered in a low voice. That feeling is exactly the same as Alicia Edith's. With this, Noah's expression slightly changed. He was surprised. Alicia Edith. This name, to the people of this world, was like thunder in their ears. Because, this girl once annihilated the Demon King, saved the continent, and was called the Saintess of Salvation. In other words, she was Aster's previous master. Other than Noah, she was recognized by Aster, but also died because of Aster's curse. That masked fairy envoy had the aura of the Saintess of Salvation? How could that be? Are you sure? Noah's expression became serious. Did you really feel the aura of the Saintess of Salvation from that masked fairy envoy? Maybe it's just an illusion. For the first time, Aster became extremely hesitant and unconfident. That fairy envoy's aura is very different from my previous masters. Moreover, Alicia should have died because of my curse. Noah could clearly hear it. Aster's voice was extremely shaken. Obviously, the aura of the Saintess of Salvation from Red Lotus caused Aster's heart to be greatly confused. Looking at Aster, Noah was a little worried. He squatted down and kept his eyes parallel to Aster's. He stared at Aster and said softly, "Are you okay?" Under Noah's worried gaze, Aster's heart calmed down. "I am Master's sword." Aster met Noah's gaze. Whether that person is Alicia or not, this will not change. Noah smiled and did not speak. He reached out and hugged Aster, silently comforting him. Aster also reached out his hand and hugged Noah tightly, trying to calm himself down. Chapter 1776. In a relatively remote corner of the forest, there was a relatively small lake. Beside the lake was a lawn. On the lawn, Claire, Linley, Fayanna, Alice, and the other girls had set up their tents. There was even a bonfire in the center, slowly burning. This was the camp of the fairy tale team. The surrounding area had already been set up by Fayanna, turning into a solid stronghold for the team. Staying in this stronghold, the members of the fairy tale team would not only receive all kinds of protection, but their strength would also increase by leaps and bounds. Even their divine power would be continuously replenished as supplies. Moreover, Fayanna had set up various traps in the surroundings. Together with Claire, Linley, and Alice, the three of them had all the elves in the surrounding area under their control and had them resist any intruders. In less than a day, she was able to set up so many powerful and varied barriers. From this, one could see Fayanna's ability. As a former fairy maiden candidate, Fayanna's ability in this aspect was indeed unquestionable. However, Fayanna herself was not very satisfied with the current results. She said that there were still many barriers to be set up, and there were still many things to be done. After tomorrow, this stronghold would be truly finished. Regarding this, the members of the fairy tale team naturally did not have any objections, leaving all of them to Fayanna. As for the rest of the girls, they would help Fayanna adjust the surrounding elves, making them display the effect of resisting the invaders, while also taking care of the rest of the work. Claire was in charge of chores in the camp, such as collecting firewood, picking wild fruits, and hunting game, ensuring the operation of the camp. Linley was in charge of the meals in the camp, ensuring that the members of the team had 3 meals a day. Alice was in charge of scouting outside the camp, investigating the movements of the other teams. And in the assignment, Noah was in charge of patrolling, eliminating some magic beasts hiding in the stronghold, ensuring the safety of the camp. Perhaps because everything that happened in the stronghold was private, there were no enslaved elves that could constantly send images back to the great sacrificial hall. Therefore, after the distribution of work, everyone could rest assured and recuperate here. They could even cleanse themselves in the water. Of course, it wasn't just Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice. There was also Noah, the male elf user. In light of this, Claire's group used stones to create a hot spring-like pool in a corner of the lake, and then set up a curtain around the pool. That was the place where the young girls would enter the water to wash their bodies. As for Noah, he was strictly forbidden from entering that place. These were all matters that had been decided before the camp was set up. Moreover, most of them were decided upon by Noah before the sword dance of the elves. Therefore, after arriving at this place, everyone moved swiftly and decisively. Before the sky turned dark, they set up the camp and set up a barrier. Only when the sky was almost dark did Noah arrive, allowing the group of girls to relax. After learning that Noah had gone to find trouble with the Purgatory Apostles, the group of girls was shocked beyond words. You went to find trouble with the Purgatory Apostles alone? Beside the bonfire, Claire seemed to be at a loss for words as she opened her mouth. I can't believe you could come back in one piece. I'm just going to say hello to them. Noah shrugged. Moreover, there are only 2 people in the Purgatory Apostles who can threaten me. The rest are not even worth mentioning. But that team has Renasubble. Linley seemed to be at a loss for words. Others can't wait to avoid them, but you actually went to find them. It's not like there are no benefits. At least I obtained a lot of useful information. Now I can make some preparations. Noah scratched his face. No matter what, that Purgatory Apostle is a threat. Since I have the strength to break in, how can I not try? That's true. Fayanna smiled bitterly. Perhaps you are the only one who has the ability and the courage to challenge a party with the strongest sword dancer. The one who shot down my spirit servant was a Purgatory Apostle, right? Alice bit her finger, somewhat unwilling to give up. It seems that I need to be more careful in the future. There seems to be an elven envoy from the Elfie clan in the Purgatory Apostles. Her investigative abilities aren't weak. If you want to bypass her and obtain information about the Purgatory Apostles, it won't be that easy. Noah said. Apart from that, the envoy called Moya is also in the Purgatory Apostles. From my deduction, she seems to be an expert specially trained to use military spirits. She should have a powerful military spirit in her hands. There's also a guy whose name I don't even know. However, he was insta-killed as soon as he appeared, so I didn't obtain any useful information. Insta-killed? The girls were all speechless. The elven envoys who were able to participate in the elven sword dance were all elites of their respective countries. Even if they weren't at Liena Subble's level, they wouldn't be weaker than them, right? For such an opponent to be insta-killed by Noah was too much of a blow to their confidence. Forget it. As for that person's information, we'll look into it later when we have the chance. Claire changed the topic. Don't forget, apart from the Purgatory Apostles, the other teams are also quite a threat. For example, the Dragon King Legion that represents the Dragon Duchy of Doragonia is a big enemy. Alice nodded in agreement. Although the Dragon Duchy of Doragonia is a bit weaker than the Ordesia Empire in terms of military power, they have won the Elven Sword Dance many times in the past. If they win again this time, under the protection of the Elven King, they will be able to catch up to the two most powerful countries on the continent, the Ordesia Empire and the Holy Georgia Kingdom. In addition, the Kurna Empire in the east of the continent also sent a team called the Four Gods. The elven envoys in that team have all contracted the divine beast elves that the country is proud of. They are very good at group tactics. Linley recalled the information in her head. It should be a strong team that isn't weaker than the Dragon King Legion. Of course, the Holy Georgia Kingdom's team also can't be ignored. Like the Ordesia Empire, they also obtained 3 spots to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. They are also a strong enemy. Fayanna reminded. Moreover, the leader of the Holy Georgia Kingdom's Holy Spirit Knights is Luminaris Saint Richette. That elven envoy might even have a hard time against the Dragon Duchess of the Dragon King Legion, right? Fayanna's words weren't without reason. Luminaris Saint Richette wasn't only a contracted elven with holy attributes, she was also the trump card of the Holy Georgia Kingdom. Moreover, this person had participated in the Elven Sword Dance Festival 3 years ago. In the Elven Sword Dance Festival 3 years ago, Luminaris overcame all the difficulties and finally lost to Rena Subble in the finals. She was only 1 step away from victory. Claire said emotionally. It is said that Luminaris has always been brooding over losing the finals 3 years ago. She is determined to defeat the strongest sword dancer in this Elven Sword Dance Festival. Noah also knew this person. Of course, Noah noticed Luminaris because this elf envoy was almost 20 years old. Only elven envoys under 20 years old could participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Therefore, Luminaris was the same as Noah, the oldest contestant in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. Apart from these teams, the other teams you need to pay attention to is the Broken Division, representing the Rosabelle Duchy. Alice said. The Rosabelle Duchy was created by a group of radicals who originally belonged to the Holy Georgia Kingdom after declaring independence. Although it is a new small country, the elven envoys in the Broken Division are all existences that have contracts with high-level holy elves. They are seen as a potential dark horse in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. Dark horse? Noah couldn't help but mutter. Then I would like to see a bit. Noah didn't expect this. This small wish would come true in the near future. Chapter 1777. Time passed by quietly. In the blink of an eye, the first day of the Elven Sword Dance Festival had come to an end. Today, when the sun rose, the entire forest presented a very peaceful atmosphere. The tension from yesterday was completely gone. That was only natural. After all, there were no more than 3 people in the other teams who could match up to Fayanna's ability. Therefore, when Fayanna built a strong stronghold for the team's camp so that her companions could rest peacefully at night, the other teams had to work through the night in order to build their strongholds. Under such circumstances, the elven envoys of the other teams would definitely not have the energy to immediately take action. Most likely, they would be hiding in their strongholds to rest. This way, the forest would naturally not be as lively as yesterday. Instead, it was as if nothing had happened. It seemed so peaceful. No one knew when this peace would be broken. However, Noah indeed had a good night's sleep. When the sun rose, Noah slowly woke up. He looked at the top of the tent that entered his sight as soon as he opened his eyes. He stretched and sat up. Beside Noah, the silver and platinum daggers were lying there. Although the luster on the daggers had been restrained, they still gave off a profound feeling. Looking at the silver and platinum daggers lying there, especially the silver dagger, Noah sighed. She really cares about it? Usually, when there was no one beside Noah to sleep, Aster would most likely transform into her human form and burrow into Noah's arms naked to sleep comfortably. Today, there were no signs of Aster appearing at all. It was obvious that yesterday's matter had affected this elven girl to some extent. Saintess of Salvation, Alicia Edith, Noah stretched out his hand and lightly brushed the silver dagger. The image of Red Lotus wearing a mask appeared in his mind. Even if we don't consider the problem of Aster's curse, the Saintess of Salvation was active at least a few hundred years ago. No matter how I think about it, that person can't be the Saintess, right? However, Noah did not doubt Aster's feelings. No matter what, other than Noah, the Saintess of Salvation was the only contractor in Aster's life. Furthermore, she died because of Aster's curse, so Aster wouldn't mistake her aura. However, Aster also said that Red Lotus's temperament was very different from the previous owner in her memory. It was just that there was a faint feeling of a saintess in her aura. Therefore, no matter how he thought about it, Red Lotus could not be the Saintess of Salvation. However, Red Lotus definitely had some sort of connection with the Saintess of Salvation. This was Noah's idea. The secrets behind this must be deeper than I thought, right? Noah sighed again. We can only take one step at a time. After saying this, Noah turned his head and lightly stroked the body of the small silver sword, as if he was talking to himself. No matter what, you still have me. Perhaps it heard Noah's words, but the small silver sword's body faintly glowed as if it was responding to Noah. Noah smiled and picked up the two small swords. He placed them in the scabbard at his waist and covered them with the uniform of the Elven Academy. Then, he stood up and walked out of the tent. Today's weather was not as gloomy as yesterday. Although there was still some fog in the air, the sun was gradually shining down from the clouds. It was believed that the fog would dissipate in no time. When Noah came out of his tent, the first thing he smelled was the burnt smell of an extinguished bonfire, followed by a burst of fragrance. What's that smell? Noah, who was attracted by the fragrance, turned his head and looked in the direction of the lake. There, a young girl was humming a song while getting water. She was busying herself by the lakeside. Under the rather pleasant humming, the young girl's luxurious light golden hair emitted a dazzling luster under the sunlight. Just like in the dormitory, Lindsay Lay wore an apron outside her uniform. With a nimble technique that did not match the status of a rich young lady, she set up a piece of wood and used it as a chopping board. She was in a very good mood as she used a kitchen knife to cut wild fruits. Beside Lindsay Lay, there was a simple platform. The section of a large tree was used as a cooking table, and stones were piled up to form a stove. On the side, there were ice cubes used to preserve the fish caught from the lake. It should be a product created by Lindsay Lay using the ice attribute magic that she was good at. Of course, making these things naturally meant that she wanted to cook. She's so skilled at cooking in the wild. Is that girl really a rich young lady? Noah exclaimed. But, I have to say, Lindsay Lay is quite virtuous. Sighing, Noah deliberately lightened his footsteps and came behind Lindsay Lay. Lindsay Lay did not seem to notice Noah's approach at all. She was still in a very good mood as she used her nimble technique to cut wild fruits and vegetables there. Looking at this scene, Noah's gaze involuntarily moved to Lindsay Lay's ears. Those sparkling snow-like ears, last time, because of Noah's prank, were very happily dyed red. Speaking of which, ears seemed to be Lindsay Lay's sensitive point. Thinking of this, Noah had the urge to prank her again. But, thinking of the tragedy that resulted from the prank last time, Noah hurriedly dispelled this idea. He reached out his hand and patted Lindsay Lay's shoulder. Ah! Lindsay Lay suddenly let out a cute cry. Her shoulders shook and she turned her head fiercely. Who is it? It's me. Noah looked at Lindsay Lay's frightened look and could not help but laugh. Why are you so timid? Who allowed you to approach me without making a sound? I didn't even hear your footsteps. Lindsay Lay was a little angry. Then, she remembered what happened last time. Her pretty face blushed and she covered her ears. Don't tell me you want to blow air into my ears again. Looking at Lindsay Lay's blushing face staring at him, Noah was amused. I just had that thought, but I immediately dismissed it. I don't want to kiss you again. Really? Lindsay Lay was a little relieved. Then, she was slightly startled and became angry again. But, what do you mean you don't want to kiss me again? Am I really that annoying? That's not it. Noah directly denied. I actually have quite a good impression of you. Lindsay Lay was startled again. Then, her pretty face blushed again. She lowered her head and looked at her fingers. Is that so? Looking at Lindsay Lay's bashful look, Noah really felt a rush of excitement. This girl, upon closer inspection, was actually quite cute. After such a thought appeared, Noah couldn't help but be shocked. He hurriedly shook his head and dispelled the crooked thoughts in his head. Then, he evaded the topic and changed the topic. Oh right, where are the others? Claire went to pick wild fruits. Alice is still using the wind elves to scout the movements of the other teams. As for Fayanna, she should be perfecting the boundary, right? Lindsay Lay's attention seemed to have been diverted. The blush on her face dissipated a lot. She answered honestly. The meal will be ready soon. When the time comes, you can go and inform everyone to come and eat. No problem. Noah nodded straightforwardly. It was also at this moment that Alice, who had used the flying elven magic, slowly floated down from the air and arrived in front of Noah and Lindsay Lay. As if sensing the strange atmosphere between Noah and Lindsay Lay, Alice frowned slightly. What are you doing? Hearing this, before Noah could say anything, Lindsay Lay seemed to have a guilty conscience and shook her head desperately. No. Nothing. How could there be anything? Ahaha. Not to mention Alice, even Noah wanted to tell Lindsay that if she said that, it would seem very suspicious. In order to avoid more trouble, Noah stepped forward and cut to the chase. Looking at how hurried you are, did something happen? That's right. Alice's expression became solemn as she said this. There's a team rushing towards us. Instantly, Noah and Lindsay Lay were stunned. Chapter 1778. In the depths of an extremely silent forest, a few young girls were quickly moving through the dense trees, hurrying in a certain direction. It was a group of young girls wearing white night attire adorned with red patterns. That attire was the uniform of the Rossibel Duchy's representative team. In other words, these young girls were the team that had been evaluated as the dark horse with the most potential in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival, the Lai Legion. At this moment, the 5 young girls belonging to the Lai Legion were moving forward in an orderly manner that seemed to be extremely well trained. As they hurried forward, they were also vigilant of their surroundings. From start to finish, they didn't let down their guard, but their expressions were rather calm. From this, it could be seen that this team's evaluation as the dark horse with the most potential wasn't just for show. Not to mention, this group of young girls were contracted by holy elves. One had to know that holy elves were known to be proud and arrogant among all elves. They would choose elves as their masters based on their preferences. Even if their masters were witches, they would only be willing to open their hearts to the purest of them. That way, they would be able to unleash extremely powerful abilities. Thus, as elven envoys whose members had formed contracts with holy elves, the Lai Legion was evaluated as the dark horse with the most potential in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. It wasn't without reason. Of course, The reason why they were evaluated as having the most potential was because of the young girl leading the team at the very front of the Live Legion. It was a young girl with wavy brown hair and extremely young facial features. The young girl's name was Mira Pazit. She was only 13 years old this year and was the youngest elven envoy in this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. Although she was only 13 years old, to be able to represent her country in the Elven Sword Dance Festival, Mira Pazit was undoubtedly an elite of the Rossibel Duchy. Moreover, this young girl was the leader of the Live Legion and was in charge of leading the team. She was only 13 years old, yet she was able to represent her country in the Elven Sword Dance Festival and become the leader of the team? There could only be two possibilities for this. 1. This young girl was only 13 years old, and her talent and strength were both quite outstanding. 2. The elven envoys of the Rossibel dukedom were generally of low levels. In the end, they could only choose such young elven envoys to participate in the battle. Although the Rossibel dukedom was only a small emerging country, it was a part of the Holy Lugia kingdom. No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible for it to be the latter. That was why Live Legion was considered the biggest dark horse of this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. However, only those in the know would know. In addition to the above reasons, there was another reason that led to this evaluation. Apart from Live Legion, none of the 24 squadrons participating in the Elven Sword Dance Festival knew the reason. If you look carefully, you will find it. The girl named Mira Pazit had an azure blue right eye and an amber left eye. A pair of different colored eyes, coupled with the young girl's tender and cute face, added a strange charm to the young girl. However, the young girl's tender and cute face did not carry any emotions, as if she was a doll. It more or less made people feel that there was no life and vitality. It was not an expression that a 13-year-old girl should have. However, under such circumstances, Mira's performance was like that of an experienced person. She was surprisingly calm. Then, after advancing for a distance, Mira used the same calm tone to order the members around her. "We are already close to the enemy's camp. They should have discovered our whereabouts. However, since they are guarding the stronghold, they should not give up the advantage of the stronghold and come out to confront us directly. However, in order to break through the stronghold, you have to use me. So, prepare first." The 4 members of Live Legion nodded in unison. However, they maintained a distance from Mira. They increased the divine power in their bodies and began to advance. Almost at the same time, an unexpected attack came. Fireball. Magic ice arrow. Wind King explosive array. Accompanied by such a shout, a huge fireball, a dense wave of ice arrows, and a violent storm burst out from the depths of the forest in front of them. As if they had grown eyes, they directly bypassed the trees and swept towards Live Legion's direction. What? The elven envoys of the Live division were all shocked. "Get out of the way," Mira immediately ordered. Suddenly, the elves of Live Legion's elves reacted. One by one, they disregarded their image and rolled to the side awkwardly. Bang! The huge fireball, dense wave of ice arrows, and violent storms suddenly fell on the ground where the elves of Live Legion's elves were standing. In the midst of the explosion, thick sand and fire were stirred up, and a strong gust of wind was set off, blowing in all directions. The elven envoys of the Live Legion, who were in a hurry to dodge, were unable to dodge the blast of wind at all. Their entire bodies were blown away, and one after another, they slammed into the surrounding trees, emitting a muffled sound as they hit the ground. Mira was the only one who managed to dodge the blast with her nimble movements. She then steadied herself and raised her head abruptly to look in front of her. Whoosh! She saw a gust of wind rolling down from midair. Above the gust of wind, 3 girls seemed to be riding on it. They lightly descended from the sky and arrived in front of Live Legion. Are they really going to attack our stronghold? Looking at their uniforms, they seem to be elves of the Holy Georgia Kingdom or the Rossibel Duchy, right? Just like Noah said, if we launch a surprise attack at this time, we will definitely succeed. Hearing this, Mira understood. Just as Mira had predicted, the other party had already discovered their whereabouts. However, the enemy's captain also seemed to have predicted that Mira would assume that the enemy wouldn't abandon their stronghold and come out to confront them head-on. Contrary to Mira's expectations, she directly came out of the stronghold and took the opportunity to launch an attack. Ugh! The elves of Lai Pelegion, who had crashed into the trees one by one, seemed to have suffered some injuries. They struggled to get up and angrily glared at Claire, Linley, and Alice. The cunning Austrians. As soon as the words fell, a light voice sounded. In terms of cunning, your country is no less cunning than us, right? Noah stood on the branch of a tree. He leaned against the trunk with his arms crossed and looked down at the elven messengers of Lai Pelegion. At this time, the teams that rushed through the night to build their stronghold must be exhausted and resting. Even if we finished building our stronghold, we must have thought that the other teams wouldn't attack and let our guard down. You must have calculated this point and launched a surprise attack, right? The elven envoys of the Lai Pa division were suddenly speechless. Mira also didn't think that their plan would be seen through so thoroughly, but she quickly calmed down and stood up, shouting to her companions around her. Don't panic, although the attack was a bit sudden and caused us some injuries, the enemy gave up their stronghold advantage. We will take them down here. Hearing this, the elves of Lai Pelegion were all energized. However, Noah laughed instead. Since we launched a surprise attack here, we must have been prepared. We have been waiting here for your arrival since 3 minutes ago. How much do you think we can do in 3 minutes? The expressions of the elves of the Lai Pa division immediately changed. It was only now that they realized. In a clearing in the forest ahead, the former fairy concubine was dancing beautifully. Under her feet, a dazzling magic array was gradually expanding. Bathed in the magic array, the auras of Claire, Linsley, and Alice's group suddenly soared, and divine power surged out. Seeing this, while Myra's expression changed, the corners of Noah's mouth curled up. The battle has only just begun. Chapter 1779. In the end, the battle didn't last long before the elves belonging to the Lai Pa division were defeated by Claire, Linsley, and Alice. In terms of battle strength alone, the elves belonging to the Lai Pa division weren't weak. At least, the other 4 elves besides Mira, together with their contracted holy elves, weren't any weaker than Claire, Linsley, and Alice. As for Mira, she seemed to be a bit weaker than her companions in terms of battle strength. Most of the time, she hid in the back and commanded. Occasionally, she would step forward and fight Claire and Alice in close combat with weapons created by elves' magic. Noah, on the other hand, stayed behind and watched the battle unfold. He had no intention of interfering at all. Therefore, in terms of numbers, there was no doubt that the Lai Pa division had the absolute advantage. Even if they had suffered some injuries from the previous surprise attack, they definitely wouldn't lose against Claire, Linsley, and Alice. Unfortunately, there was still Fianna on the side of Claire, Linsley, and Alice. Although Fianna didn't go to the front lines, she stayed by Noah's side and performed the ritual dance, bestowing one blessing after another to Claire, Linsley, and Alice, making the 3 girls stronger and stronger, gradually suppressing the 5 elves on the other side. With Fianna's support, Claire, Linley, and Alice's physical strength and divine aura were always at their peak. There was no sign of exhaustion at all. Coupled with the buff from the ritual god music, it took less than a minute for them to suppress all the elves of the Lai Pa division. Knowing that if this continued, they would definitely lose. Mira had planned countless times to get rid of the most important person, Fianna, but because of Linley's constant sniping from behind, he would be forced to retreat every time he got close to Fianna. Moreover, even if Linsley's sniping didn't work, Fianna still had Noah by her side to protect her. Therefore, even if the Lai Pa division broke through the defense line and arrived in front of Fianna, they wouldn't succeed. In this way, there was no suspense in the outcome. After bitterly holding on for 3 minutes, except for Mira, the other 4 elven envoys of the broken army were all defeated. Their magic stones were taken away, and one by one, they were teleported back to the great sacrificial hall and left the elven sword dance ritual. As for Mira, she was tied up by Claire's whip and brought in front of Noah. Slap. Behind Noah, Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice high-fived each other, each holding a magic stone, sharing the joy of victory. On the other hand, Mira, who was brought to Noah, tried to struggle. After realizing that it was futile, she looked at Noah with an extremely calm gaze. "Since you've already won, why don't you take my magic stones?" Myra's voice didn't contain any unwillingness or annoyance. It was as if something insignificant had happened. She didn't even carry any emotions. Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice's joy decreased by more than half. After putting away the magic stones, their gazes converged on Noah. Obviously, even the group of girls didn't know why Noah didn't take Myra's magic stones, but instead had Claire tie Mira up and bring her in front of him. Noah lowered his head and looked at Mira, who was tied up by Claire's whip. He stroked his chin and asked such a question. "I'm very curious. Why didn't you use your elven device or even summon your contracted elves in the battle?" After being reminded by Noah, the group of girls also reacted. In the battle just now, Mira indeed only used a weapon refined by elven magic. He didn't use his elven device or summon his contracted elves. It was precisely because of this that Mira, as the captain, had shown less strength than the others in the battle just now. If he had used his elven device or summoned his contracted elves, then the Lipo Legion should have been able to hold on for a while. Perhaps they could have broken through Linley's attack and arrived in front of Fianna to confront Noah. However, Mira didn't summon his contracted elven device or use his elven device. Even if his companions were defeated one by one, he still didn't use it. This was a bit thought-provoking. "Don't tell me you don't have a contracted elves at all?" Claire guessed, but immediately denied her own theory. "No, if you don't have a contracted elves, then the weapons refined by elven magic won't be able to be used in battle at all. Without a contracted elven device, although elven users could use elven magic, the power of elven magic would be pitifully small. As mentioned before, elves residing in the elemental elven world could be summoned in two forms. The first was that they had no mass and didn't have a fixed appearance. They could only summon the elves' abilities. They were often used to cast elven magic in their original form to amplify divine might. The second was to directly summon the elves themselves and use the purified form of the elves in battle. When elven users used elven magic, they would usually use the first method to summon the elves' abilities and divine might and use it on themselves. This way, the power of elven magic would be so great that it couldn't be ignored. For example, when Claire had a contract with a fairy, she could summon a fireball bigger than a soccer ball and capable of instantly evaporating a pool of water when she used the fireball magic. However, if Claire didn't have a contracted elven magic, it would already be pretty good if the fireball was the size of a fist. Its heat wouldn't even be able to evaporate a basin of water, right? It was precisely because of this that elven magic used by elven users was of the same attribute as their contracted elven magic. Elven magic of different attributes couldn't be boosted by contracted elven magic even if one wanted to. It was also because of this that if Mira didn't have a contract with a spirit, she wouldn't even be able to forge a weapon for polishing her nails, let alone a weapon for battle. That was why Claire was so sure. It can't be that there's a problem with the contracted elven spirit, right? Linley combed her hair and said with some displeasure. If that's really the case, then it's too unpleasant. That's right. Alice nodded. There's a problem with the contracted elven spirit and they still plan to attack our stronghold. It's simply unwise. Maybe they feel that attacking our stronghold doesn't require a contracted elven spirit? Fianna sighed. Then we're really being looked down upon. That's right. Noah spread his hands. So, can you please help us explain? Hearing this, Mira lowered her head and didn't say a word. Seeing this, the group of girls looked at each other. Noah stared straight at Mira. After a while, he pursed his lips. Forget it. If you don't want to say it, I won't force you. Saying this, Noah reached out and untied the whip on Myra's body. Then, Noah said, "You can leave." This one sentence stunned all the girls present. "Leave?" Claire exclaimed in shock. "You want to let her go?" "It can't be." Lincilii was surprised. "You're not going to take the magic stones from her?" Viviana and Alice looked at each other in dismay. They were also astonished. Even Mira was stunned. She looked at Noah with eyes full of confusion. Under Myra's gaze, Noah laughed bitterly. "Don't look at me like that. Also, don't think that I'm scheming something. I just don't want to attack you." "Yes." Noah just didn't want to attack Mira. "Who told you to have a name that makes people unable to be hostile?" Noah glanced at Mira. "Hurry up and leave before I change my mind." After saying this, Noah turned around and walked towards the stronghold. The group of girls was still in a daze, but they didn't raise any objections. They could only helplessly follow him. Seeing Noah's group about to leave, Myra's heterochromatic eyes flickered. After a while, she suddenly spoke. "In that case, I want to make a deal with you." Noah and the others stopped in their tracks. Chapter 1780. Deal? Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice all turned their heads and looked at Mira. Deal? Noah was also curious and asked directly. "Tell me, what kind of deal do you want to make with me?" Mira met Noah's gaze fearlessly, and to everyone's astonishment, she said so. "Do you want to defeat Liena Subble?" "WH. What?" The girls were stunned. Not to mention the group of girls, even Noah couldn't help but be taken aback as he looked at Mira with deep meaning. "You can't be trying to tell me that you have a way to defeat Liena Subble, right?" As a person who possessed the power of the Dark Elf King and completely controlled this power due to the existence of the world fragment, Lien's level had long surpassed the level of the Elf Envoy. To put it bluntly, with Lien's strength, even without using the Dark Elf King, she could dominate the entire world of Elf Envoys. It was precisely because of this that Lien was called the strongest sword dancer. Once she used the power of the Dark Elf King, Lien's level would instantly skyrocket to 4 digits, reaching the same level as the Elf King. She would control the world's dark elemental energy, have endless divine power, and her body would be eternal and indestructible. In that case, only the Elf King and his level would be able to match Lotus. Not to mention one Elf Envoy, even if all of them worked together, they still wouldn't be a match for Lien. Could Mira have a way to defeat such an existence? At least, Noah didn't believe it. Mira seemed to know her own limits and directly denied Noah's profound question. "I can't guarantee that I can defeat the strongest sword dancer, but everyone knows that Liena Subble's contracted spirit is a spirit of the dark attribute. If you have my power, you should be able to face the strongest sword dancer much more easily, right?" Hearing this, Noah finally understood Myra's meaning. "So that's how it is. Your contracted spirit is a holy elf, which has a restraining effect on dark elves. If you were to hold the line and suppress Liena Subble's dark elves, would our chances of victory be much higher against that strongest sword dancer?" "That's right." Mira nodded expressionlessly. "My contracted spirit is the type that can only be summoned through a special ritual. It should be very useful, right? So it's a summoning type sprite." Everyone was enlightened. That was because the more powerful the contracted spirit, the greater the restrictions. For example, even the Elf King was afraid of Aster, the strongest sword elf that was more powerful than a mythical level elf. Forming a contract with him required one to pay the price of one's life. One day, he would die from the curse. Apart from that, even if he succeeded in forming a contract with Aster, he would need to pay a huge amount of divine might to use the strongest sword fairy's elven magic device. If it wasn't Noah but another elf user, even if it was the 5 elven concubines with the greatest divine power, they wouldn't be able to use Aster's elven device for more than 3 minutes. Only someone like Noah, who had endless divine power and was completely immune to Aster's curse, could fully unleash Aster's power that was comparable to the Elf King's. As for Athena, using this former goddess elven magic device also required a huge amount of divine power. It wasn't any less than Aster's elven magic device. And if he wanted to form a contract with Athena, that was even more ridiculous. Because this former goddess had all of Noah's authority, she could only form a contract with Noah. From this point of view, a sprite that could only form a contract with one elf user had more restrictions than Aster, who was the strongest sword elf. From this, it could be seen how harsh the conditions for a powerful contracted spirit were. This was also the reason why Noah was so sarcastic when Lestia revealed that someone in the Purgatory Apostles had formed a contract with a mythical level elf. As an elf second only to the Elf King, logically speaking, mythical level elves wouldn't even enter the human world. It was even more impossible to form a contract with an elf user. After all, even the highest ranked dark elf, Lestia, was only at the demon god level. Gray and Vath's contracted spirits were also at the demon god level, but they weren't at the mythical level yet. Even the strongest sword dancer and the strongest elf user's contracted spirits were only at the demon god level. It was obvious how impossible it was to form a contract with a mythical level elf. Of course, since Noah could form a contract with Aster, who was comparable to the Elf King, then other people might have something special that made it possible to form a contract with a mythical level elf. However, even if one succeeded in forming a contract with a mythical level elf, they would have to pay a huge price, right? Unless the other party was as special as Noah, and just happened to offset the price of the contract. As for some powerful spirits, although they didn't need to pay such a huge price, there were still huge restrictions when it came to summoning them. Spirits that had to be summoned through rituals were one of them. In order to obtain great power, one had to spend time making complicated preparations. Myra's contracted spirit was probably of this type. This type of spirit wasn't suitable for a sword dance in a personal battle. However, if there were companions covering for them and the summoning was successful, they would be able to unleash great power. No wonder you didn't summon your contracted spirit in the battle just now. It turns out you couldn't summon it. Claire understood. In the face of such a sudden surprise attack, how could there be so much time for you to prepare a summoning ritual? However, a spirit of this level is just right for attacking a city. Alice also understood. If we had stayed in the stronghold, then you would have had enough time to summon your spirit. And when the summoning was successful, perhaps the stronghold I built would really be breached by you, right? Phaena said in a fit of pique. No wonder you dared to attack our stronghold at this time. It's a pity that Noah saw through this plan, Linley said proudly. Well, it's only natural if that's the case. While the girls were showing their own expressions, Noah looked pensive on the surface, but he was feeling helpless in his heart. Perhaps the summoning ritual type of holy elf could indeed pose a great threat to the dark elemental Lestia, but that was only against Lestia. In front of Lotus, who had the overwhelming power of the dark elf king, this level of restraint was completely useless. Moreover, even if she didn't use the dark elf king's power, Lotus wouldn't lose to a mere elemental restraint. Don't forget, the trump card of the Holy Roha Kingdom, the elven envoy named Luminalise, was a contractor of the Holy Elf. And didn't that envoy also lose to Lotus 3 years ago? If one wanted to use elemental restraint to defeat Lotus, then even if it wasn't impossible, it wasn't easy to succeed. And this was under the condition that Lotus didn't use the Dark Elf King's power. If Lotus used the Dark Elf King's power, then unless it was a holy elf of Aster's level, it wouldn't be able to do anything in front of such overwhelming power. Moreover, if it was just elemental restraint, Noah could also do it. After all, even though Aster was of the steel element, Athena was of the holy element. With Athena's power, she definitely wouldn't lose to a summoning ritual type of holy elf. If Athena's existence was exposed, then this former goddess would definitely become the strongest holy elf, right? Therefore, Myra's suggestion didn't affect Noah at all. And Myra's plan was also seen through by Noah. You want to lend the power of your contracted elf to us in exchange for defeating Lotus Asubble to form an alliance with us, right? Noah went straight to the point. Then, during this period, the magic crystals we get from fighting together will be divided equally. Is this the deal you mentioned? That's right. Mira nodded and looked straight at Noah. I think that this deal won't hurt either of us. The group of young girls immediately began to show signs of interest. Only Noah scratched his cheeks. In the end, on account of Myra's name and age, he didn't reject on the spot. I need time to think about it. Before that, follow us back to the stronghold. Mira pondered for a moment, then nodded. Chapter 1781. Because the Blaze Division had originally planned to attack the stronghold where Noah and the others were, they weren't too far away from the stronghold. Therefore, it took about 3 minutes for them to return to the stronghold. They came to the center of the campsite and sat around the extinguished bonfire. As soon as they sat down, Mira immediately asked Noah. "So, what do you think?" Hearing this, Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice all looked at Noah. Frankly speaking, Myra's proposal was actually quite valuable for Noah and his team to adopt. The holy elf that needed to be summoned through a ritual not only had a great restraining effect on the dark elves, but also had a miraculous effect in battles with other teams. Compared to the holy elf that could be summoned through a ritual, Fayanna's Geokius was also a holy elf, but it specialized in defense. In addition, Fayanna had to shoulder the responsibility of performing the ritual and protecting everyone, so she had no extra energy to summon the holy elf to fight. Myra's power was very precious. Just like what Mira said, this was a proposal that did not harm either side. Therefore, the girls could not find a reason to refuse. However, Noah was the captain. The decision was still up to Noah. Under the gaze of the girls, Noah sighed and then looked at Mira. "Sorry, I will refuse this proposal." Mira immediately fell silent. The rest of the girls were all stunned and puzzled. Why refuse? Claire could not help but ask. "I don't think there is any problem with Myra's proposal. The problem is not a problem. At least, the entire consideration is not wrong." Noah looked up and looked at the group of girls. "However, I want to say that in my opinion, this alone is absolutely not enough to defeat Lotus Asubble." This sentence made the girls unable to refute even if they wanted to. Although the girls were not like Noah, who knew what kind of power was residing in Lotus's body, the title of the strongest sword dancer was enough to intimidate the elves. As the idol of the elves all over the world, Lena Shubble was so powerful that even those who didn't know would blindly believe her. Claire, Linsley, Fayanna, and Alice were all elven users who yearned for Lotus. Naturally, they wouldn't directly boast that they could definitely defeat Lena Shubble. "I know that Lena Shubble is very powerful." Mira was silent for a while, then turned to look at Noah. "However, as far as I know, your strength is not weak either. You even have the same sword dance skill as Lena Shubble. You once fought with Lena Shubble for a short period of time and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. In this way, with the help of my contracted sprite, how could you not defeat the strongest sword dancer?" In fact, the rest of the girls thought the same. If it was just an elemental counter, it would not be enough to defeat Lena Shubble. However, with the outstanding strength of Noah, wouldn't that be a different story? "So, the Russell Bell Duchy also has that information?" Noah shrugged. "However, it is precisely because I have fought with Lena Shubble that I can tell you with certainty that if it is just this, it will not be enough to defeat the strongest sword dancer." At this point, Noah met Myra's gaze. "Unless your contracted sprite is a mythical sprite." "God mythical sprite?" The girls all sucked in a breath of cold air. "Are you kidding me?" Mira also opened her eyes wide and immediately retorted. "If I had a mythical holy sprite, even without you, I would be able to defeat Lena Shubble myself." It was not without reason that Mira would say this. In the ranking of sprites, other than the Elven King, all sprites were divided into low, middle, high, and highest ranks. In the ranking of sprites, other than the Elven King, there were also 3 ranks: demonic sprites, demon god sprites, and mythical sprites. Demonic sprites referred to powerful sprites that could not be controlled or dealt with by a single person, and were comparable to a team of elven knights. In the Kingdom of Austria, only the elven messengers with the title of 12 Knights, who were at the top of all the elven messengers in the Kingdom of Austria, could do so. Demon god sprites referred to sprites that could not be controlled or dealt with by a single person, and were recognized by humans as the highest grade sprites. It wouldn't be strange for an elf of this level to destroy a city or even several cities once it was enraged. Even the trump cards of large countries like Versilia, Leola, and Luminaris would not be able to match up to a demon god sprite. Only the strongest elven messengers on the continent, Grey and Vaz, were recognized as capable of fighting a demon god sprite alone. As for mythical sprites, they only existed in the world of elemental sprites and would not appear in the human world. They were terrifying existences that were not recognized by humans. There was only one evaluation of sprites of this level. Match? Impossible. Humans could not match up to a mythical sprite. Therefore, this type of sprite was classified as at a mythical grade, meaning that humans could not surpass it. Even if it was Lena Subble, it would be the same. At least, that was what all the girls present, including Mira, thought. However, Noah still wanted to say it. "I'm not joking with you." Noah looked into Myra's eyes and said resolutely. "Unless it's a mythical sprite, it can't even pose the slightest threat to Lena Subble." Noah's resolute words made Mira start to waver. How? How could that be?" Linley stuttered. Even if it's Lena Subble, it can't be that strong, right?" "Yes," Alice stuttered. "It was rare for her to do so. No matter what, Lena Subble is still a human. How could she be so strong that even a mythical sprite can only pose a little threat? I don't believe it either." Claire shook her head. "If Lena Subble can suppress a demon god sprite, then I believe it. But only a mythical sprite can pose a threat to her. Is that possible? That's a sprite second only to the Sprite King." Viviana laughed. "How could a human match up to a sprite of that level? Not to mention, it's just a small threat, right?" "Yes, how could a human reach that level?" Noah said unhappily. "The problem is that although Lena Subble is a human, there's a power in her body that doesn't belong to a human. A power that doesn't belong to a human." All the girls were stunned. "In short, if you want to rely on your contracted sprite to deal with Lena Subble, it probably won't work. Moreover, this is only a competition to determine the top 4. It's a bit unrealistic to think of eliminating the strongest sword dancer here," Noah said. "However, a ritual-type holy sprite is indeed a powerful force, so let's use another plan." "Another plan?" Mira suddenly looked at Noah. "We can form an alliance with you," Noah suggested. "During this period, you need to lend the power of your contracted sprite to us to attack the strongholds of the other teams. In the end, we'll split the magic stones in a ratio of 2 to 1. Of course, we'll get 2 and you get 1. How about it?" Myra's brows immediately furrowed. "This is one of the biggest concessions I've ever made." Noah spread his hands. "To be honest, my contracted elf is a sword elf of the steel element. The elves of the elves in my party aren't very suitable for large-scale battles. If we want to destroy a stronghold that is as sturdy as a city, your elf should be of great use. But that's all there is to it. It's not that we can't do anything without you. That's why you should know what to do." Hearing this, what other choice did Mira have? At that moment, Mira could only sigh. Seeing this, everyone looked at each other and smiled. Thus, the alliance was formed. Chapter 1782. In a corner of the quiet forest, a few figures scuttled out of the bushes and arrived in front of a shining barrier. Seeing the shining barrier, Alice immediately said, "It's here. Right now, it's the closest stronghold to us." Hearing this, Claire, Linley, and Fianna's spirits were lifted. "Then, what should we do now?" Mira looked at Noah. "Attack the stronghold immediately?" Noah smiled faintly and walked past the group of girls. He walked forward until he was in front of the glowing barrier. Then, he turned around and looked at the group of girls. Is there a need to wait? As Noah said that, a dazzling light flickered in his hand and turned into a silver steel sword that he held tightly in his hand. The group of girls immediately understood and looked at each other. Soon after, they lined up in an orderly manner and gently closed their eyes. Mira, who was in the center, began to speak. Loyal knights of the noble holy king, your swords are the power to eradicate the strong and help the weak. Therefore, I, in the name of the great holy king, command you to gather on my battlefield, along with the solemn elven incantation. One of Mira's amber eyes abruptly flashed with radiance. Raise your swords and fight for me, holy king division. When the solemn incantation fell, with Mira as the center, the ground began to shine with brilliant light. In the light, one after another, mysterious and complicated magic formations appeared one after another, covering the entire ground in an instant. And in the countless magic formations, bursts of light particles began to float in the air and gradually gathered. Not long after, streaks of light appeared around Mira. They were knights with swords, spears, and large shields. Their bodies were made of light. About a few hundred knights formed an army and lined up neatly around Mira. At this moment, including Mira, Claire, Linley, Viviana, and Alice, the four of them surged with phosphorescent divine power. Their bodies flashed with dazzling light. Under such circumstances, Mira opened her eyes and pointed forward. Advance! Holy King Division. Under Mira's command, the Light Knights all raised their weapons and charged toward Noah. Seeing this, Noah's eyes flashed and he tightened his grip on the holy sword. Then, the attack begins. After saying that, Noah fiercely swung his sword at the side of the barrier. Piszczysz. The swift and fierce sword flashes cut through the barrier cleanly, tearing it to shreds. In front of Aster, who had the ability to counter curses, a mere barrier was nothing. After cutting through the barrier, Noah directly leaped away from the battlefield. Almost at the same time, the knights rushed into the inner part of the enchantment and began to kill. Not long after, within the barrier, a burst of panicked cries rang out. Impossible. The barrier was broken in an instant? How is that possible? What kind of elves are these? The elven envoys guarding the stronghold began to let out cries of surprise and panic as they commanded their elves to lunge at the oncoming army of knights. However, under the charge of hundreds of light knights, the elves were all bounced back by the shields. One of the elves was even unlucky enough to be cut in half by a knight's sword and dissipated into the air. That scene made the elves in the stronghold widen their eyes. Noah, who was standing guard beside the group of girls, watched as the elves in the stronghold fought against the knights like mantises trying to stop a chariot. They were constantly forced back, and the enchantments, traps, and elves in the stronghold were mercilessly slashed apart. He couldn't help but nod his head. Then, Noah turned his head and looked in Mira's direction. To be more precise, it should be said that he was looking at Mira's glowing amber eye. That was not an ordinary eye. Although it had the function of an eye, in fact, that amber eye was actually a very rare elven ore. It was called the demon sealing eye. It was a special eye that very few children in the family that inherited the bloodline of the elves were born with. In that eye, there would often be spirits with extremely great power sealed within it. Mira was one of the elves who had the demon sealing eye. The elves sealed in Mira's demon sealing eye were the army elves in front of him that was destroying the enemy's stronghold bit by bit, the Saint Monarch division. The so-called army elves referred to a contract elves formed by a plurality of elves gathered together. Therefore, when Mira's Saint Monarch division was released, hundreds of night elves would immediately be summoned to attack the stronghold for Mira. Moreover, the Saint Monarch division was not only a type of army elves, but also a type of military elves. Their level had reached the tactical level, and they could easily become powerful reinforcements on the battlefield. Therefore, in terms of strength, each night elf might not even be comparable to Fianna's Geochius, but together, they could be said to be an invincible elven army. With the strength of the Saint Monarch division, not to mention attacking a stronghold, it was possible to use them to suppress some weaker demon god elves. However, since it was a tactical level military elf, it meant that it required several outstanding elves to control it successfully. Apart from experts like Mao Ye who were specially trained to control military elves, no one could control a tactical-level military elf by themselves. The other 4 elves of the Rosable Duchy's Lipa division existed to use Myra's Saint Monarch division. If they could use a tactical-level military elf well, it was not impossible to obtain victory in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. This was the reason why the Lipa division was rated as a dark horse with the most potential. However, because of Noah's surprise attack, the elves of the Rosable Duchy didn't even have the opportunity to use this tactical-level military elf, and were directly eliminated. Originally, this way, Myra's Saint Monarch division would not have the opportunity to use it again. But fortunately, Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice were all excellent elven users. They definitely weren't any weaker than the Lipa division. This was especially true for Claire and Fianna. One was a descendant of the Elstian family, and the other was a former elven maiden candidate. They were extremely talented in this aspect. Therefore, after a few days of fumbling and Myra's guidance, they finally succeeded in summoning the tactical-level military elf that Mira was looking for in the eyes of demons, and used it to attack and occupy a stronghold. If they didn't have the help of the tactical-level military elf, Noah would have a hard time dealing with groups of elves and traps in a stronghold, even if the barrier couldn't stop him with his terrifying curse resistance and magic-breaking holy sword. At the very least, if those elves split up and fled, Noah might not be able to stop them all by himself. As for Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice, they didn't have a curse resistance like Noah's. If they entered another stronghold, they would only be weakened and very likely become a burden. This was why Noah valued Myra's elf that could attack and occupy a stronghold. With the Sage Monarch division and Noah as his Dharma protector, it was only a matter of time before things went according to plan. About 5 minutes later, the stronghold was destroyed by the Saint Monarch division, and Noah's group obtained 5 magic stones. Cheers! In their own camps, everyone raised the cups in their hands and clinked them hard. In this lively atmosphere, Noah raised his cup in Myra's direction. Today, thanks to Myra's help, we successfully took down a stronghold. Everyone, let's toast to Mira. The young girls immediately raised their cups in front of Mira. Myra's face was full of perplexity, but he couldn't resist everyone's enthusiasm. He could only stiffly raise his cup. This scene made Noah smile involuntarily. Chapter 1783. Without a doubt, everyone had gained a lot during this period of time. 6 days had passed since the start of the competition. At noon the next day, the 7 days would be over. The elven envoys who were still in the forest would all be teleported back to the great sacrificial hall and the final results would be announced. During this period of time, thanks to Myra's tactical military elves, Noah's group had attacked 6 strongholds in one fell swoop and gained a total of 30 magic crystals. If not for the fact that they had spent a few days training in order to summon the tactical military elves, their gains would have been even greater. If not for the tactical military elves, Noah's group wouldn't have gained so much. After all, just as Noah had said, Aster was a sword elven of the steel element and wasn't suited for large-scale battles. Even if he could rely on his valiant strength to attack the strongholds, if the enemy wanted to escape, Noah wouldn't be able to make them stay. In that case, the magic crystals they gained would definitely be much lower. However, with the Sage Monarch division's encirclement, the enemy couldn't escape even if they wanted to. In the end, all of them were left behind and the magic crystals went into the pockets of Noah's group. Therefore, Myra's contribution wasn't small. Of course, without Claire, Linley, Viviana, and Alice, Myra's Sage Monarch division wouldn't have been able to be used. Therefore, the contribution of the girls wasn't small. As for Noah, during this period of time, he was only responsible for guarding the girls who were concentrating on commanding the tactical military elves. If not for Noah, the enemy elves would definitely have taken advantage of the opportunity to ambush the girls and interrupt their control of the Sage Monarch division, thus turning the tables. In view of this, in fact, if one were to talk about contributions, everyone present had some. However, the Sage Monarch division was under Myra's control, so they still had to show their gratitude. According to the distribution system, we will receive 2/3 of the 30 magic stones. In other words, we will receive 20 magic stones. After expressing his gratitude, Noah settled the accounts. The remaining 10 magic crystals will go to Mira. Does anyone have any objections? The group of girls naturally had no objections. By the way, other than the magic stones that they had to carry with them, the rest of the magic stones that they obtained from others were kept by Noah, who had the strongest strength. Hence, Noah took out his gift card and took out 10 magic stones before handing them to Mira. Mira didn't argue and simply accepted the magic stone. In this way, Mira had 11 magic stones in total, including her own magic stones. As for fairy tale, in addition to the 4 magic stones we obtained from the Lai Legion, each of us has 1 magic stone, and these 20 magic stones are our spoils of war. Our team now has 29 magic stones. Noah looked at the group of girls and smiled. Rejoice, my friends. We've already qualified for the finals. Hearing this, a smile involuntarily appeared on the faces of the group of girls, but their eyes were filled with uncontrollable excitement. 29 magic stones. After collecting so many magic stones, Noah and his team would definitely pass the preliminaries and enter the finals. There were a total of 24 teams participating in the Elven Sword Dance Festival, and each team had 5 members. Everyone's magic stones added up to a total of 120 magic stones. In other words, the magic stones that Noah and his team had obtained accounted for a quarter of all the magic stones. The preliminaries would select the 4 teams with the most magic stones and let them advance to the finals. With a quarter of the magic stones, they would definitely be able to secure a spot in the top 4. In the following day, as long as Noah and his team didn't lose the magic stones in their hands, they would definitely be able to enter the top 4 and advance to the finals. How could the group of girls not be excited? As for Mira, it would be difficult for her to enter the finals with 11 magic stones. Noah looked at Mira. Hence, in the following day, if you still want to continue your alliance and attack the strongholds of the other teams to increase your loot, we'll still accompany you. Upon hearing this, Mira couldn't help but be taken aback, and her eyes were filled with confusion. However, Mira didn't say anything. Instead, she remained silent for a while before nodding her head. That's it then. There wasn't any pause or confusion in her speech, and she was just like a machine. It was simple and straightforward, and there wasn't a single trace of emotion in her words. The girls were obviously used to Myra's behavior, and they all gathered together as if nothing had happened, and happily discussed what was to come. However, the group of girls didn't neglect Mira, and while they were discussing excitedly, they didn't forget to drag Mira into their circle, and kept asking her questions. Mira was like a little sister to these young ladies who were pure and didn't have many bad thoughts. She wasn't an opponent who could become an enemy, right? Hence, during this period of time, the girls treated Mira as if she was their biological sister. And this enthusiasm seemed to be troubling Mira. Noah could tell that it wasn't that Mira hated it, but that she didn't know how to deal with it. Regarding this, Noah didn't say much, and allowed the group of girls to pester Mira. Just like this, the sky gradually turned dark amidst the rather joyous atmosphere. Not long after, night fell. In the campsite, the bonfire was burning slowly. At this moment, it was already late at night. In the tents next to the bonfire, Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice had already fallen asleep and entered a sweet dreamland. Come to think of it, obtaining the qualifications to enter the finals would definitely let these girls have a good dream, right? On the other hand, Noah, who was in charge of the night watch, came out of the tent and began patrolling. Although there was a barrier in the stronghold, and if someone were to invade, the barrier would definitely react and wake everyone up, there would still be some wild elves and magical beasts that would barge in aimlessly. These wild elves and magical beasts weren't within the barrier's range of defense. No matter what, most of the elves and magical beasts only had the intelligence of wild beasts, and some of them didn't even have any intelligence at all. They wouldn't even consider whether they would trigger the barrier and attract the attention of others. If these existences were set within the barrier's range of defense, the barrier would sound an alarm every few days, and it wouldn't be able to withstand it at all. Hence, no stronghold would set the wild elves and magical beasts as defensive targets. It was precisely because of this that in order to prevent these elves and magical beasts from suddenly attacking the elven users in the campsite, patrolling and night watch were necessary. And this would naturally attract some skilled elven users who would let their spirits in to investigate the movements in the stronghold. Regarding this, Alice would usually let her contracted spirits out and let them carry out anti-reconnaissance to eliminate all the elves. This wasn't within Noah's scope of work. Noah only needed to be in charge of patrolling and driving away or eliminating the wild elves and magical beasts. During the patrolling, Noah inadvertently caught a glimpse of a figure in the direction of the lake. Looking at the figure, Noah pondered for a while and finally walked over. Under the pitch-black moonlight, by the lake, a petite girl stood facing the wind and gazed into the distance. A pair of different-colored eyes flickered slightly, and no one knew what she was thinking about. After a while, the girl's ears twitched slightly, and she turned around and looked behind. There, Noah didn't deliberately make any sound and directly walked over. "It's you?" The girl tilted her head and asked indifferently. "Don't you need to patrol?" "I've already patrolled once, and there aren't any problems at the moment." Noah came in front of the girl, looked at her, and asked, "Why isn't Mira asleep yet?" Mira lowered her head slightly. Soon after, she turned her head once again and looked into the distance as she replied with this sentence. "I'm thinking about something." "Is that so?" Noah smiled without any surprise. "Then why don't you tell me?" Mira fell silent. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.